Good morning, everyone. A man with curly brown hair brushing his shoulders and a pair of round spectacles resting neatly on his pointed nose greeted the class, a book tucked in one hand as he strode confidently into the classroom. Morning, Mr. Edwin. Godfrey caught the unified greeting of his soon-to-be classmates as he stepped inside, following closely behind a girl his age. Her golden white hair was tied into a sleek ponytail, glimmering faintly beneath the fluorescent lights. We have 2 transfer students joining us today, Edwin announced in a light, almost playful tone. Your sophomore year will certainly be more interesting, as both of them are already rather popular. Godfrey's fingers tightened around the strap of his backpack, his ocean blue eyes shifting to the girl standing just half a meter away. Porcelain skin, wide golden orange eyes, and lips that glistened faintly glossed without a doubt, and certainly not with anything ordinary. Why don't you both introduce yourselves? Edwin's warm voice echoed from the front of the class. I'm Isolde Pendragon. Pendragon. Godfrey's pupils shrank. He wasn't alone. Across the entire room, everyone's expressions shifted instantly. Whispers swept through the classroom like wind through dry grass. But what lingered most was the unmistakable awe shining in the sophomore's eyes. Who didn't know the Pendragons? A lineage of summoners, legendary for consistently producing dragon summoners. Godfrey cleared his throat, catching a sidelong glance from Isolde, who raised one willowy eyebrow, faint amusement flickering across her face. Good morning, everyone. I'm Godfrey Daniels and I hope we can all— You're the hero's trash. The outburst was immediate and came from Dale, a boy with a close-cropped haircut, his hands gripping the edge of his desk as though he had just unearthed buried treasure. Daniels from Amazon, right? Another boy asked lazily. Snow-white hair framed his almost angelic face that rested on his palm, and one brow slightly raised. Godfrey forced a thin smile. Yes, it's the trash, Snow muttered with a shrug, his gaze drifting back toward the window. A ripple of laughter spread through the class. Some girls muffled giggles behind their palms. Others chuckled openly. Godfrey is a human being just like you. You don't call people trash. Edwin's rebuke was firm. But Godfrey knew better. Words carried little weight here. This was Manhattan Summoners High, one of the finest institutions in the world. The students here were heirs of wealth, prestige, and ancient legacies. They weren't merely being educated. They were being groomed to lead the next generation. Am I not the same? He thought bitterly. He didn't grow poor. His father had been a war hero, famed for stopping a horde of 100,000 orcs all by himself and holding the line until his final breath. And with such brilliance, the world expected his son to shine just as brightly. But Godfrey hadn't awakened. Awakening early, without the aid of the ceremony, was considered proof of extraordinary potential. His father's towering legacy only made Godfrey's failure all the more humiliating. To the world, he was a blemish to the hero's name. Go on, sit down. Class is about to begin, Edwin said, his voice gentle. Godfrey's gaze trailed after Isolde, the Pendragon Ice Princess herself, who had awakened at the impossible age of 1. The news about her awakening had shaken the world and been a global sensation back then, and he had grown up hearing about it in second-hand awe. He pushed aside the heaviness pressing on his chest and slid into a seat near the back rows. Isolde, unsurprisingly, chose the row next to the window, with Snow sitting directly in front of her. Godfrey, Edwin called suddenly, you'll be joining the freshmen for their awakening ceremony tomorrow morning, right? The muffled snickers of his classmates were unmistakable. Their lips trembled with suppressed laughter. Eyes gleamed with mockery. Godfrey gave a quiet nod in response. By now, he had grown used to all that. Once, he had also dreamed of grandeur, of summoning a magnificent beast, of becoming one of the Academy's admired boys, the kind surrounded by loyal friends and pretty girls whose gazes would follow him like moths to a flame. Thinking about it now, that dream almost felt laughable. Now then, Edwin began, his voice rising just enough to pull Godfrey from his thoughts. We all know of the first summoner, Adam. He continued, flipping open the resting notebook on the lectern. And his summon? The class fell silent instantly. The prisoner of the golden headband, better known as the Monkey King. A king-tier summon famed for his intelligence and unmatched battle prowess. A being capable of duplicating and mimicking the traits of any opponent. Edwin paused, letting the weight of those words sink in before he resumed. And yet, he vanished into a white dungeon gate. And that brings us to today's topic. What are dungeon gates? What are their traits? And why have they persisted for over a century? Several hands shot up across the room, eager to show off their knowledge. Godfrey tuned it all out. His gaze drifted to the world beyond the window, to the white clouds floating lazily across the sky, sunlight spilling over the distant rooftops. That was enough for him. When the bell rang for a break, Godfrey rose, only to find Dale striding toward him, flanked by two others, Orwin and Cecil. The scowl on Dale's face melted into a practiced smile as he turned toward Isolde instead. "I'm Dale," he said smoothly, extending his hand. Isolde brushed past him without so much as a glance. A brief silence followed her exit, broken by Dale's sharp, brittle laugh. Then he turned to Godfrey. "Don't you feel like trash?" he sneered. "Your father threw his life away fighting those orcs because your mother was about to give birth to you. That day, we lost a diamond and got garbage instead. Keep believing that," Godfrey thought as he walked past the fellow, his hands tucked in his pockets. He wouldn't take the bait. Not against Dale, one of the Academy's strongest sophomores, and certainly not after the guy was so plainly ignored by Isolde. He had barely made it down the hallway when an arm hooked around his neck. Godfrey turned his head slightly. Green hair, sharp eyes, and a lean build. If Dale was a bull, this one was a wolf. "Heh, look at him, scared already?" Another boy jeered, plainer both in face and presence, stepping up beside him. Godfrey's irritation soured into caution when he spotted the figure trailing them. Snow. Clearly, these two were his lackeys. Isolde was untouchable. Godfrey, on the other hand, was fair game. "Heard your father's summon was the Gold-Eater Colossus," the green-haired boy, Siegfried, said with a sly wink. "Bet it must have left your family a mountain of gold. How about you buy us something after school?" "Leave him." Snow's voice cut through the corridor like a blade of ice. The two lackeys faltered, puzzled, until Snow stretched one leg forward, drawing their attention to the loosened lace of his shoe. "The son of a war hero tying his classmates' shoes," Siegfried snickered, shoving Godfrey toward him. "Fitting, isn't it? A reminder of where you belong. You've got hands, don't you?" Godfrey replied in a flat tone. "Or do you just want to make sure the whole school knows you can't tie your own shoes?" Snow's eyes narrowed, and a faint, eerie shimmer flickered within his eyes. In the next heartbeat, Godfrey found himself teetering over the cafeteria balcony rail. Third floor, wind tugging at his clothes, the ground yawning below. Someone's grip on his jacket was the only thing keeping him from plummeting headlong down from this height. He jumped. What in the world? Did you see that? Creep just climbed the rail on his own. A cacophony of shocked voices entered into Godfrey's ears, making him realize Snow must have used his beast's ability on him. "Are you all right?" Isolde asked. Her voice was calm, but her expression remained unreadable as ever, not betraying the slightest emotion. Yet her tone carried more weight than her face ever did. "Man, I expected him to snap out of it eventually, but he would have really fallen. TSK. Pathetic." Siegfried pointed at Godfrey with open mockery. Snow simply carried his tray to a table, as if nearly throwing someone off the third floor was no different than swatting a bothersome fly for him. "You're laughing? After almost killing me?" Godfrey's jaw tightened. His ocean blue eyes narrowed as he glared at Snow. His chest swelled with restrained fury as he shoved through the crowd and into the heart of the cafeteria. Beside him, Isolde moved with her usual effortless grace. At the age of 16, the same as Godfrey, her golden white hair and amber gold eyes gave her an almost ethereal presence. The tension in the cafeteria itself seemed to bend around her. "You still won't shut that mouth of yours," Siegfried barked. He stepped forward and threw a straight punch. It carried strength but was reckless, full of openings. The sophomore slammed into the floor with a bone-rattling thud. "I'll kill you," Siegfried roared, scrambling to his feet at once. This time his punch carried true strength, the kind that could crack cement walls. But to his shock, Godfrey raised his forearm and blocked it. A strike that should have snapped his bone barely made him flinch. Siegfried froze. His connection with his beast was gone, and along with it, his strength. In that moment, he was no different from a powerless human. Godfrey's fist struck him square across the face. A second blow, an uppercut, lifted Siegfried off his feet and sent him sprawling across the cafeteria floor. "Did you see that?" A student gasped, abandoning his untouched tray. Another, midway through shoveling food into his mouth, stopped chewing and stared. With his mouth agape. "He beat Siegfried. That's impossible." Cecil, the bob-cut girl at Dale's table, muttered and frowned deeply. Dale, however, only chuckled and crossed his arms, his gaze sliding mockingly towards Snow, who, for once, looked frozen in shock. Just then, another lackey lunged forward, too fast for Godfrey to follow. Even with his guard raised, the boy's fists broke through, slamming into him again and again. A final uppercut, the same blow as Godfrey's as revenge, launched him into the air. He crashed hard against the wall and slumped to the ground, motionless. The cafeteria fell into stunned silence. Snow rose slowly, his expression distorted in disdain. Then, without a word, he turned and stormed out. Students hurried after him, scattering like startled birds. The idea that Snow had lost his composure left them unsettled. Had it been Dale, perhaps they would have accepted it. But Snow? No. That was simply unthinkable. When the hall emptied, only Isolde remained. She stood over Godfrey's crumpled form, her gaze cool. "Giving you an opportunity for a fair fight was stupid," she said flatly. "You were doomed from the start." Even so, Godfrey's voice was low but steady as he forced himself upright and met her eyes. "I gave him what he deserved." Isolde's golden eyes narrowed, but she remained silent. "Thank you," Godfrey continued, his breath still uneven. "He got to taste what it's like, calling to your soul and hearing nothing in return. For a minute or two, he lived what I've lived for 16 years. He pressed a hand against his chest and winced. "Something's broken," he muttered, staggering toward the exit. Minutes later, Godfrey lay on a narrow sickbed in the academy infirmary. At Manhattan High, the sick bay wasn't for fevers or colds. It was for the battered, the broken, those students who survived fights that pushed them to the brink. Growth was forged in conflict. To maim or to kill was forbidden. On paper, Godfrey stared at the ceiling, wondering if those rules truly meant anything. Snow had nearly ended him. The nurse, dressed in a pristine white coat over pale blue attire, extended her hand. Behind her, a glowing magical circle bloomed, light spilling across the room as a radiant dove descended from its center. Its beak and talons glimmered like polished gold, and its wings stretched twice that of a stellar sea eagle, the largest bird recorded before the cataclysm a century ago. With a single beat of its wings, warmth washed over Godfrey. His ribs knit together with soft pops, bruises faded, and a heavy drowsiness tugged at his eyes. "You took quite the beating," the nurse sighed, her gaze gentle. It hadn't even been a day since his transfer, and he had already ended up here. This place wasn't meant for the ordinary. Manhattan High was for monsters and those who served them. You either ruled or you bowed. And Godfrey looked far too stubborn to bow and far too weak to rule. Before he could reply, a knock sounded at the door. Moments later, Isolde's voice drifted in as the nurse went to open the door. "He didn't get to eat his lunch. I brought something for him. Please make sure he eats." Godfrey's brow furrowed, hard lines forming on his forehead as faint warmth stirred in his chest. Why was she being kind to him? His question was answered when the nurse returned, carrying a tray in her hands. And tucked beneath the plate lay a folded slip of white paper. On it, written in elegant script, "I just like your face." Don't overthink it. Godfrey stared, heat rising in his cheeks as he stared at the note. You tell a guy you like his face and expect him not to overthink about it? How does that even work? He muttered. The nurse flipped through a file. I suggest you rest. You're Godfrey Daniels, yes? He nodded. You have the awakening ceremony tomorrow. If you don't rest, you may not be fit for it. And remember, if you miss this chance, you may never awaken anything beyond the low tier. So when I say rest, I mean it. So the next morning, the academy grounds gleamed beneath the rising sun. Crowds of freshmen gathered in the courtyard alongside countless others, outsiders who had paid dearly for access to Manhattan's legendary awakening platform, famed for producing higher awakenings than anywhere else in the world. Godfrey stood among them, hands buried deep in his pockets, fists clenched tight. This was it, his only chance. He had failed to awaken naturally, and if he failed here too, the truth would be undeniable. There was no summon within his soul. No summon meant no future. In this world, a summon defined a man's worth. To have nothing meant you were nothing, an insect in a kingdom of predators. Worse, his acceptance into Manhattan High had been conditional. He needed to possess at least an elite tier beast if he wanted to stay. There were 5 tiers. Low tier, 1.0 to 3.4. Elite tier, 3.5 to 5.4. High tier, 5.5 to 7.9. Lord tier, 8.0 to 10.0. And the fabled King/Queen tier, 10.1 to 12.9. Even dragons, for all their majesty, rarely reached king tier, even when they possessed immense potential. From the classrooms above, students leaned out of windows to watch. At the courtyard's center, an elevated platform shimmered with glowing runes, powered by 6 dungeon cores. The headmaster stepped forward, slim and severe in a pinstripe suit, his presence radiating discipline. His eyes swept across the crowd as he began. As you all know, his voice was just right for the crowd. What happens today will determine your very lives. There will be no needless speeches. We shall begin immediately. His gaze dropped to the slip of paper in his hand. The first name is... He raised an eyebrow, cleared his throat and lifted his gaze back to the crowd, locking onto the only teen wearing Manhattan's jacket. Godfrey Daniels. With silent steps that seemed to echo like thunder in his ears, Godfrey ascended the hexagonal platform, his gaze fixed on the headmaster, who stepped aside to let him stand at the center of the stage. Beside the headmaster stood a woman holding a tablet, a device used to measure the tier of a summoner's summon. She would be the first one to see whether he was merely a human, or whether he had a summon lying dormant within him. Calm yourself, take deep breaths and close your eyes. You'll find yourself in a place we call your soul space, and there you will stand before your summon. Godfrey obeyed while the headmaster continued. It will be dark, but do not worry. The light of your summon will be the only light you will need. By then, Godfrey could no longer hear what the headmaster was saying. The dungeon cores glowed faintly. Their brilliance dulled beneath the sunlight, and Godfrey felt himself drawn inward, into his soul space. He had heard countless experiences before of his mother and many others. It was always the same. They appeared floating in what looked like an endless dark space, and their beast awaited them there. Some said they were frightened at first glance, some were overjoyed, and some recoiled at what they saw. But when Godfrey opened his eyes, he didn't know what to make of the sight before him. He stood upon a massive staircase as wide as a highway. The blocks that made up the steps were pure white, as though marble and magic had fused into one. The staircase stretched upward toward a towering wall crowned by a colossal wooden double door, and above it burned a radiant sun, its piercing light flooding everything in brilliance. Godfrey looked around slowly, bewildered. Where was the darkness? Why wasn't he floating in space but instead standing on a staircase? It can't be that I died the moment I was about to awaken, right? He chortled, though the jest felt hollow. Whatever the case, it was better to see what awaited him at the top. There was no other way. The moment he took a step, the world shifted, and Godfrey found himself already standing before the great door. Carved into its surface with exquisite detail was a great oval shield crossed by a long sword. He placed his hands against the wood and gave it the gentlest nudge. The door swung inward. "My God!" The headmaster snapped toward the woman with the gauging device, deep lines etching his temples. "What is it?" "His tear," the woman whispered as she looked at him, horrified. "It's one." "It's what?" The headmaster stepped closer, his voice sharp. A few seconds later, the woman finally managed to speak. "It's 12.1. She could barely force those words out, as though her voice was chained to a heavy stone and dragged down. The headmaster's eyes widened. "His summon has the potential of a 12.1? That's king tier." The woman shook her head vehemently and thrust the screen toward him. "It's 12.1, and the potential." The instant he saw the tablet, the headmaster's face was drained of all color, as if he had seen a ghost. The reading revealed that the potential exceeded 12.9. It was incalculable. At that very moment, a golden diagram flared above Godfrey, its brilliance forcing Isolde, Snow, Dale, and the others in his class to squint their eyes as much as they could since they had leaned out from the windows to get a better view of the awakening. With a thunderous metallic crash, a figure descended from the diagram arret. It landed heavily, clad in ornate golden armor layered over thick steel, and a white cape fluttering from its shoulders. The figure stood a full 7 feet tall, a great oval shield in one hand and a long sword in the other. His presence was imposing, almost suffocating. The helm bore a single narrow vertical slit, no wider than a finger, glowing faintly from within. "A knight," Snow muttered, disdain flashing in his eyes. Everyone knew humanoid summons. The golems, orcs, and the likes were considered inferior compared to beast summons. The only notable exceptions were Adam's Monkey King, which was part monkey, and Cain's Dark Seraph, which carried celestial blood. "You've summoned a humanoid creature," the woman announced aloud, her voice steady now. "Tier 3.0 and potential 6.0. Then, she shot a brief, furtive glance at the headmaster. Only the two of them knew what the device had displayed moments ago. Yet this was the reading she spoke aloud. Was he one of those rare summoners who possessed two summons within them? If not, then was the gauge wrong? But since when did a low-tier summon possess such absurd growth potential? "You may descend," the headmaster said in an even tone, his expression unreadable as he watched Godfrey retrieve his summon and step down from the platform. Yet his mind spiraled with calculations. "He stays under watch. There's something we haven't grasped yet. I need to know if that boy is truly a low-tier summoner or a king-tier monster hiding in disguise. A humanoid summon? What a terrible way to start the ceremony." Godfrey heard someone mutter from the crowd, their voice tight with fear for their own child's fate. "It has absurd potential, though. Imagine the chance to rise from a low tier to a high tier wasted on some ancient knight whose sword might not even scratch a beast." Godfrey's eyes snapped to the man who had spoken, standing beside his child. Their eyes met, but the disdain in the man's stare didn't faze him. Nothing did, not when his thoughts were in chaos. He remembered the stone door, the symbol carved into it, the glimpse he had caught behind the chamber of the knight he had summoned. Everyone said the first thing you saw in your soul space was your true summon. The first thing he saw wasn't the knight. It was the staircase leading up to what looked like a palace. If that was his true summon, then the knight was only a part of it. Which meant behind the other doors, there were more knights. When he finally stepped into his classroom, his thoughts faded under the weight of every gaze fixed on him. The boy who was once mocked for having no summon now had one. But that hardly changed anything. "Your father's summon could spit gold and wipe out an army of orcs," Dale sneered, clutching his stomach as he laughed. "But yours can only wave around a puny sword and shield. Did the garbage just upgrade into the garbage bin?" His lackeys roared with laughter, while others only looked at Godfrey with pity. With a summon like this, he would always remain a mockery to his father's legacy. "It's about time for combat class. Let's test what that knight of yours can do." Siegfried rose to his feet, his green eyes sharp with grudge as he ruffled his hair and strode out. One by one, the others followed, some casting him pitying looks, some mocking with their faces, and some pretending not to care. Finally, only Isolde remained. "It's a cool night," she said at last. Godfrey rolled his eyes. "The entire class is waiting to see me get humiliated publicly." "True," she pursed her lips. "But every summon has its advantages. I bet your knight has his." "Every summon has its advantages? What a joke. What kind of advantage could a low-tier summon possibly have against the monstrosities before him?" Standing in a massive open-roof arena, Godfrey watched from the crowd as two figures faced each other on a wide platform. On one side stood Isolde and her summon at her side. The white-scaled beast stretched its leathery wings like the sails of an ancient warship, the membranes stretching from its elongated forelimbs. Its powerful hind legs were thick with muscle, claws digging into the stone floor of the arena, while its long tail lashed behind it, shaking the ground. But it was the summon's head that stole everyone's breath. Ferocious, reptilian, lined with a row of needle-like teeth that were sharp enough to shred whatever or whoever was unlucky enough to fall into its maw. A white wyvern. Tier 5.5. Potential 7.0. Current Tier 6.8. Facing them stood Dale and his summon. A massive, hunched bull towering nearly 7 feet at the shoulders. Two jagged horns jutted upward, their sharp tips crackling with lightning, while curved spikes of the same lightning hue protruded along its back. Its entire body was entirely covered in black, chitinous plating, natural armor strong enough to deflect bullets. The Armored Emperor Bull. Tier 5.2. Potential 6.2. Both Isolde and Dale had bonded with their summons before they were old enough to even read properly, blessed early with powerful companions. Dale smirked, confidence shining through, though his usual cockiness was restrained by Isolde's presence. "My bull is already at 6.1 high tier, with lightning at its command." "Oh!" Isolde's response was curt, almost dismissive. Her wyvern lifted its head, cold intelligence gleaming in its eyes as it stared down at the bull. Dale's smile faltered, but he clenched his jaw and signaled his summon. The beast charged forward, its every step sending arcs of lightning snaking across the stone platform. Sparks gathered between its horns, condensing into a searing bolt of energy. Isolde's wyvern growled. Its throat rumbled, then white mist swirled from its maw. In an instant, the charging bull froze mid-stride, encased in solid ice. Gasps erupted through the stands. Her wyvern. It can breathe an element. Frost raced across the platform, cracking the stone itself as it raced outward. The frozen bull detonated the lightning from within the frozen prison, shattering the ice into glittering shards. But the wyvern was already upon it. With a violent whip of its massive, scaled tail, it struck the bull's neck, hurling the armored beast across the arena, skidding along the stone and blood spilling from its jaws. Dale's hands trembled as faint lightning flickered along his arms, far weaker than before. Isolde wins. The combat instructor's voice rang out, stern and decisive. "Dale, retrieve your summon and let it recover. You treated her as if she were any other opponent. Her summon outclasses yours, but your defeat was sealed by your poor use of its abilities." Dale gritted his teeth and recalled his bull. Godfrey's gaze lingered on Isolde as she returned to the stands. Every eye followed her with admiration. She wasn't just beautiful. She was talented, her future brimming with promise. For a brief second, she turned her head and glanced at him. Godfrey's lips curved faintly. "Cool summon," he mouthed silently. A proud smile touched her face as she caught his words. "Snow wins." The announcement snapped Godfrey's attention back to the arena. His eyes widened. Snow stood beneath a strangely mesmerizing butterfly that was the size of a man. Its wings shimmered with a crimson glow, sparkling like falling starlight. That glimmer drifted toward the snake another girl had summoned, instantly turning both summon and summoner to stone. A stunned silence swept through the arena. Snow lazily snapped his fingers. The glimmer-winged butterfly flapped its wings once, releasing a glimmer of multicolored light that melted the petrification away. The girl collapsed, trembling and in tears, her eyes wide with the lingering terror of being trapped inside her own body. "Go easy next time. They are your classmates," the instructor said sternly. "I did go easy," Snow replied coolly as he descended from the platform. Gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd. The Glimmerwing butterfly was no ordinary summon. It was a tier 6.0 with a potential of 6.5. Though deadly in combat, even more terrifying was its side effect. The longer it was bonded with its master, the more strikingly beautiful its summoner became. And Snow was already living proof of that. Before Godfrey could fully process what he had just witnessed, the instructor's voice rang out again. "Godfrey Daniels, you're next." A knot tightened in his chest, but he exhaled slowly, trying to steady himself. His fists clenched and relaxed as he strode forward. This would be his first true battle as a summoner, the very beginning of a fundamental change in his life. Across the platform stood his opponent, a girl with twin ponytails. She smirked as if already certain of her victory. Godfrey closed his eyes for a brief moment, recalling the glowing words etched into a stone tablet beside the throne where he had found his knight. Summon. Knight Captain of the Golden Order type. Hybrid tier. 3.0 potential. 6.0 description. A Knight Captain of the Sword and Shield unit, the greatest among them. An oath-bound soldier of the Golden Order, alchemically altered to slay monstrous beasts. Wields a 50-pound sword, a 100-pound shield, and armor weighing 150 pounds. In blackout state, this Knight Captain surpasses the limits of his base strength, ascends to greater heights, and mimics the abilities of his foes. Godfrey grinned within his soul space. A Knight Captain, huh? Then I'll call you Mountain. His eyes snapped open to reveal the real world before him. Across from him, the girl's summon materialized. A hulking iron-clawed crab, its steel pincers gleaming, each snap powerful enough to tear through a stone wall. "Mountain, it's time. Come out." A golden summoning diagram blazed beside him, and the towering knight emerged, gold and steel glinting under the light, a white cloak trailing behind. A blazing sun was etched across its cuirass. With heavy metallic steps, Mountain moved past Godfrey and raised his great shield, his sword poised to strike its enemy. The girl chuckled. Her crab scuttled forward, its claws slamming down against Mountain's shield with brutal force. The impact rang out like a clap of thunder. But instead of being forced back, the knight's shield flared with glowing runes. The absorbed force surged outward, exploding across the crab's shell and tearing wounds through its armor. The girl and her summon recoiled in shock. Mountain lowered his shield and swung his massive blade, cleaving through one of the crab's steel claws. Gasps erupted as blood spurted across the platform. But Mountain wasn't done. Hatred radiated from his stance as he slammed his ironclad boot into the crab's chest, sending it tumbling backward. His sword rose high, ready to end the creature in a single decisive strike. "Stop!" Godfrey's voice cut through the arena, sharp with shock. Mountain froze, his blade hovering just an inch above the crab's head. The arena fell completely silent. For a heartbeat, even the instructor stood stunned. Then he barked an order and rushed forward, retrieving the wounded crab before hurrying toward the school nurse to have its severed claw reattached. All around, students stared at Godfrey with wide eyes, disbelief written all over their faces. None of them could comprehend what they had just witnessed. Thinking back about what had just happened, Godfrey recalled the description of his summon. A Knight Captain of the Sword and Shield unit, the greatest of them all. An oath-bound soldier of the Golden Order, alchemically altered to slay monstrous beasts. Wields a 50-pound sword, a 100-pound shield, and armor weighing 150 pounds. In blackout state, this Knight Captain surpasses the limits of his base strength, ascends to greater heights, and mimics the abilities of his foes. Alchemically altered to slay monstrous beasts. His eyes slowly widened as the implication settled in. Over time, human souls began manifesting these creatures within themselves. But their roots, their true origin, had always been the dungeon gates. You're walking with a girl, and your mind is somewhere else? You're quite something, Godfrey. Isolde's voice cut through his thoughts like sunlight piercing through mist. He turned to his right, his ocean-blue eyes meeting the golden-orange gaze of the captivating beauty beside him. She carried her white backpack in one hand with the faintest smile resting on her lips. There was no permanent damage, she reassured, reading his thoughts, or so she thought. Didn't you hear when the combat instructor said the nurse reattached the crab's claw? Godfrey nodded slowly. I honestly didn't expect that to happen. Your expression during the spar was enough to let me know that. Isolde narrowed her eyes slightly. I was stunned too, to see a 3.0 summon completely overwhelming a 3.1. That was impressive. The way your knight moved, refined, precise, without any wasted movements. It didn't look like the usual clumsy strikes of a low-tier summon. She then tilted her head thoughtfully. So I came to a conclusion. Your summon is intelligent, isn't it? Perhaps. Godfrey shrugged casually. Isolde clicked her tongue and lightly shoved his shoulder. Stop acting all high and mighty. Classes had ended, and the students were making their way toward their dormitories. Godfrey assumed Isolde would be heading to hers as well, until a sleek black car pulled up ahead, honking twice. And from it stepped out a man in a suit, opening the back door with a respectful bow. Miss Isolde. Godfrey raised a brow as he turned to her. You don't stay in the dormitory? She shook her head, brushing her hair back. My parents arranged for me to have an apartment of my own outside the school with the school management. I don't know how long it will last, though. See you tomorrow. She waved as the car door shut and the car rolled away. Godfrey blinked, sighed, and turned toward the boys' dorms. Excitement simmered beneath his calm exterior. He just wanted to return to his soul space and explore the palace he had glimpsed. Perhaps with the help of those carved symbols on the second door, he could get answers and uncover what lay within. And thanks to today's fight, he had learned something important. Mountain's armor wasn't made up of ordinary steel. It possessed its own effects, like the shield's reflective ability. There was so much to uncover. Lost in thought and walking at a slower pace than usual, Godfrey noticed that the campus path had grown quiet. Most students had already left, either in their rooms, glued to their phones, or hanging out with friends, which was why it struck him as odd to see someone waiting ahead. A student leaned against the wall, arms crossed. He looked older, 17, maybe 18, a third year. Their eyes met, and Godfrey immediately caught the blaze of anger burning in the boy's gaze. The upperclassman cracked his neck as Godfrey approached closer to the dorm gate. I heard you weren't a summoner, so we skipped you. No one gave you a proper introduction into the boys' domain. The student sneered, stepping into his path. Godfrey loosened his shoulders. What do you want? Just when was this nonsense going to end? The third year's expression twisted with rage. You just summoned a useless humanoid, and you dared to flaunt your worthless knight's sword on my sister's crab. He clenched his fist, and a summoning diagram flared to life beside him. A golden-armored creature emerged from the diagram, a beast that curled into itself, forming a gleaming wheel. You'll pay for that. The iron-scaled armadillo shot forward, its body compressing into a spinning golden sphere. In the blink of an eye, it shrank from the size of a man to that of a basketball, its speed tripling in the process. Then, like a streak of light, it slammed into Godfrey before he could even react. The impact lifted him off his feet, hurling him through the air, hitting the pavement hard and rolling before skidding to a stop. An iron-scaled armadillo. Current tier 4.0. A beast infamous for its defense and speed. But this one was worse. Flames erupted from its plated body, fire licking across its scales. This one wasn't just fast and sturdy. It had developed elemental offense. Sam, the third year, loomed over Godfrey with a vicious grin. His arm gleamed as scales began spreading across his skin until his entire forearm was plated in the beast's steel-like armor. You're dead. Saying that, he raised his clawed hand. Before the blow could fall, a golden diagram flared to life beside Godfrey. Mountain charged forth, sword already mid-swing. His horizontal slash forced Sam to switch places with his beast. He vanished in a flash only to reappear where the beast stood, making the armadillo take the blow instead. Sparks exploded as Mountain's blade rang against its iron scales. The beast retaliated with brutal force instantly, its blazing claws tearing through the air. Mountain barely raised his shield in time, but the blow was so heavy that its impact shattered the pavement beneath him, driving him backward in a grinding trail of stone and dust. From behind, Sam let out a dark chuckle. His summon reared up, its claws blazing as they swept down. Godfrey rolled away at the last second, feeling the searing heat scorch the air above him. His chest tightened. Against a third-year, an elite-tier summon, there was no way Mountain could match this thing in his current state. There was only one option left. Use Blackout State. Now! Godfrey's mind screamed the command as the flaming claws descended again. A sudden gust swept through the street, rustling his hair. The source was Mountain. The knight's armor no longer appeared golden and had instead begun gleaming a dark crimson. His long sword gleamed black as obsidian, his shield the shade of dried blood. A suffocating aura radiated from him as his own flames ignited across its form, darker and more violent. With a roar of steel, Mountain charged. The 7-foot knight rammed into the armadillo, slamming it into the wall hard enough for cracks to spiderweb across the white stone. The beast shrieked as Mountain's flames burned hotter, fiercer and even more violent than its own. Sam's smirk vanished. The armadillo tried to curl into a defensive ball, trying to enter its strongest defensive form, but Mountain was relentless and gave it no chance. His shield crashed down with a crushing force, shattering the stance, and then he raised his sword for the killing strike. "Stop!" Sam screamed, his face draining of color. In less than 5 seconds, the battlefield had reversed. That knight hadn't just grown stronger. He had copied the armadillo's flames. Mountain turned away from the fallen beast, his boots ringing against stone, his blood-red helm tilting toward Godfrey. The obsidian sword pointed downward with the crimson shield steadied at his side, as if asking, "What is your command?" Godfrey beckoned his knight to retreat, allowing Sam to recall his summon. It hadn't been long since Godfrey awakened Mountain, and the toll was already evident. The blackout state had forced Mountain from 3.0 to an unbelievable 4.0, but the cost was clear. Godfrey's face had gone pale, his body trembling. His breathing became slightly uneven, and his body felt weaker than usual. It was natural. Most new summoners needed a week, sometimes even a month, before their bond strengthened enough to maintain a summon beyond a few minutes. With time, they could maintain their companions for hours, even days. The most powerful summoners could keep their summons manifested all year, 365 days without rest, repeating the feat without strain. But the soul space was their natural cradle, a place where summons recovered and grew. That was why they were always recalled after battle. "Cherish the mercy I've shown you today," Godfrey said flatly as he walked past Sam. The upperclassman stood frozen, disbelief etched across his face at the humiliation of his defeat. "I was wondering when you'd leave Isolde's side." A familiar, mocking voice made Godfrey halt his steps. He turned. His eyes narrowed, seeing Siegfried and Maldred strolling side by side, approaching him. Snow followed silently behind them, phone in hand. Without warning, Maldred extended his palm. Quills shot out of his palm, crossing the distance in a split second. Godfrey barely had time to cross his arms in defense before they pierced into his forearms. He tried to summon Mountain, but dizziness washed over him. Before he could recover, Siegfried appeared before him in a blur of green. His hands had morphed into jade-like claws, large and gleaming under the sunlight. They clamped over Godfrey's face. In the next instant, Siegfried slammed his head into the wall. Stone cracked like glass, fractures spreading outward like spiderwebs before Godfrey collapsed limply to the ground. "Oops. Used too much strength?" Siegfried laughed, retracting his claws as if nothing had happened. He crouched beside the unconscious boy, tilting his head with a smirk. "I wonder what that Pendragon girl sees in you. Is she into weak boys?" Maldred strolled past Sam, who still stood stiff and wide-eyed. His gaze drifted toward Snow, the calm, silent figure whose mere presence dwarfed everyone else's. Sam's throat tightened. He was a third year, a 4.0 summoner. But Snow was already a 6.5. Despite being a year below, Snow was untouchable. And beside him was Siegfried, rumored to be 4.6 with defenses rivaling the elite 5.0 tier. Still, he was merely Snow's subordinate. Watching them crush Godfrey so effortlessly stirred something ugly in Sam's chest. His earlier humiliation began to fade, replaced by a twisted satisfaction. That's right. He's nothing before true talents. Snow, silent as ever, cast a dismissive glance at the unconscious Godfrey. With one sharp kick, he shoved him against the wall like discarded trash, then walked past, scrolling on his phone. When Godfrey's blue eyes finally fluttered open, he found the school nurse leaning over him. "You're awake. I was starting to get worried," she said, relief softening her voice. He groaned and pushed himself up to sit, his fingers touching the sore spot on his head. "Don't worry, I've treated your wounds. After awakening your summon, your body has already grown tougher than before, so it wasn't life-threatening. But the shock knocked you unconscious." Her tone was gentle, but Godfrey still caught the hint of pity buried in her voice, and that made his jaw tighten. "Can you apologize to your classmates?" she asked carefully, trying to reason with him. "You're supposed to be friends. Why are you apologize to people who want me as their lapdog?" Godfrey snapped, biting his lip and clenching his fists. He inhaled a few slow, deep breaths, forcing himself to calm down, then lowered his head. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to yell. Would lashing out at the nurse solve anything?" No. He already knew the answer. The others had years to train to grow alongside their summons. Even the sophomores had at least 1 year of experience. He hadn't even had a single day. His blue eyes flickered with sharpness as he recalled what he knew. Summons grew slowly within the soul space. Battles accelerated that growth, but the true catalyst was the dungeon core, something that could only be found in Green Gates. Mountain was still low tier, but if Godfrey could push him to elite tier 4.0, then with Blackout State he could rival a 5.0. Mountain's unique weapons even gave him the ability to injure tougher foes, enemies up to 0.5 tiers higher than himself. That meant one thing: if Mountain reached 4.0, Godfrey could have the power to threaten even a 5.5 summon. For the next day, Mr. Edwin entered the classroom and dropped his book onto the desk before facing the students. His sharp eyes settled on the empty seat beside Isolde. "Mr. Godfrey Daniels was severely injured yesterday," he announced. "He'll be taking a few weeks off to recover. However, he will return before the ranking competition at the end of this month. Remember, those who make it into the top 3 will have higher chances of graduating as valedictorians, and their summons potential will be boosted. Work hard." The classroom immediately erupted in whispers. The coward ran after a simple head bump. Siegfried scoffed loudly while Maldred leaned over, whispering the story to another student, who snickered. "So he's gone," Isolde thought to herself, her golden-orange eyes glinting coldly as they swept toward Dale and Snow. With that humanoid summon, it was only a matter of time, sneered the girl Godfrey had defeated in combat class the day before. "Manhattan is a place for the great, not trash hiding behind his father's name." "Trash mocking trash," Dale cut in with a scowl. "Your brother only picked a fight with him because you were beaten by a mere humanoid summon." The girl's face turned pale, and she snapped her lips shut. She dared to mock Godfrey, but she wouldn't dare challenge Dale. "Maybe it's because of Isolde," another whispered. "The top boys are furious she spends time with Godfrey instead of them." The classroom buzzed louder until Mr. Edwin's voice cracked through the noise like a whip. "I don't want to hear another word." He slammed his notes onto the lectern, his stern gaze sweeping across the room. "Today we will discuss the 2 categories of summons, Chimera and Primal. These are the only 2 types of Several sessions later, Cecil stepped out of the female bathroom and was about to pass the staff's corridor when a voice made her freeze. king tier, a male exclaimed. Yes, a king tier was detected yesterday, a woman replied, her tone unsteady. At first, the headmaster and I thought it was a mistake. But this morning, the authorities contacted us and confirmed it. Their gauges picked it up as well. But the strange part is, the student's summon doesn't resemble any known king tier summon. Which student? It's Godfrey Daniels. The sophomore transfer. What? The man's shocked outburst echoed Cecil's own thoughts. She covered her mouth with trembling hands. Godfrey, a king tier summoner. Impossible. Her heart raced. King tiers were the stuff of nightmares and legends. One had once declared himself a god, and the world had barely stopped him. How could that boy, the one who couldn't even defend himself, possess such a terrifying rank? When she finally returned to the cafeteria, her eyes instinctively sought Siegfried, the one who had humiliated Godfrey. No, it can't be true. She clenched her fists. A king tier? That's absurd. That Godfrey awakened a stupid knight, and everyone saw it. These gossipers have lost their minds. Though she made herself believe that internally, that seemingly stupid knight had defeated her classmate and her elder brother on the very day it was summoned, and that too by a boy who had no prior experience as a summoner. Something was very wrong. With a traveling bag in one hand, a plain white hood, and black pants, Godfrey walked through the airport terminal. Among the hundreds of people moving about, he was nothing special. No one spared him a second glance, just as he preferred. It was better if no one recognized him. Unfortunately, he had spoken too soon. From the corner of his left eye, he spotted a group of guys and girls pointing at him as though he were some sort of celebrity. Godfrey shut his eyes and sighed. This was Amazon City, his home, and of course, the place where his title as a shame to his parents was most exalted. With such a stain on his name, why wouldn't he leave for Manhattan? A place far away from here? Well, Manhattan hadn't been much better either. So much for hope. Lifting his gaze to the screen above the terminal, he raised an eyebrow at the words coming out of the mouth of a female news anchor. Her words made Godfrey squint. Dungeon gates had been part of the world ever since their first appearance 100 years ago, but that didn't make them any less dangerous, especially a green dungeon gate. There were 3 known types of dungeon gates. The blue gate, nearly permanent, which could be cleared repeatedly without ever closing. Sometimes it even grew larger. The green gate, far more dangerous, which had no indicators. Anyone could wander into it unknowingly, but unlike the blue gate, they could not leave until the dungeon was cleared. And the red gate, a citywide catastrophe. It was a red gate that had once spewed forth 100,000 orcs, the same disaster his father had faced. With these thoughts weighing on him, Godfrey left the terminal and boarded a taxi, which carried him toward his house. Almost everyone in Amazon City knew his street. After a 20-minute drive, he alighted before a massive black gate and high walls covered in lush artificial grass. Lifting his gaze, he found himself staring at the white, 2-story building with vast glass walls and an aesthetic that would have turned the heads of any passerby. With a beep, the gate slid open, and he stepped into the yard. Before him stretched a 10-foot-tall flower maze that spanned the width and length of the courtyard, the beautiful house lying just beyond. It was an intimidating sight for most, but not for Godfrey. He had been navigating this maze since he could walk. The public, as usual, had it wrong. It wasn't his father who had made the family rich with a gold-producing summon. The reverse was true. His father's summon was the Gold-Eater Colossus, a creature that devoured gold in order to grow stronger. It was his mother who had brought true wealth into the household. Her summon possessed the power to heal all kinds of illnesses and injuries. Even those without limbs had a chance of regrowth if they were treated with the healing water it produced. As long as his mother lived, that water never lost its potency. Her summon was officially classified as high tier, but its utility and value made it equal to, if not greater than, a lord tier summon. The rich came from every corner of the world to beg for her aid. Desperation, however, bred recklessness. More than once, intruders had tried sneaking into their compound. Hence the maze. After several people were found wandering lost for days within it, most had stopped trying. Godfrey passed through the shifting maze with ease and emerged on the other side. Inside, he entered a vast sitting room furnished with black sofas that contrasted beautifully with the pure white walls. At the window stood a brown-haired woman with her back to him. She wore an apron tied around her waist, oven mitts still covering her hands as she held a phone to her ear. "Director, it's my son," she said warmly. "He's on his way here, and I want to surprise him. You know he's been through a lot." "Valentina, it's already been a day," came the thick, stern reply. "There are important people from across the world here at the hospital. Summoners whose lives preserve thousands more. You can't ignore them for a boy who isn't even sick." Valentina frowned. "He's my son. I'm not saying he isn't, but you can't take a week off. The mayor has already sent someone you need to attend to. I expect to see you in a few hours." The call cut. When Valentina turned, she froze. Godfrey stood in the doorway, his expression distorted. He had heard everything. With his sharpened senses, and the call set on speaker, how could he not? "I don't like how they use you," Godfrey said, his tone heavy. Valentina softened, stepping close to caress his hair before placing a kiss on his forehead. "I prepared lunch. It's your favorite." Godfrey scoffed but reluctantly followed her. After lunch, he escorted her outside with Victoria, the tall, suit-clad housekeeper whose trousers accentuated her long, powerful legs. "Victoria, take care of him for me," Valentina said before stepping into her car. The maze shifted, opening a clear path for her departure. Once she was gone, Godfrey returned to the dining room, Victoria quietly following. "Will you still be eating?" she asked, gathering what remained of his lunch. Godfrey shook his head, watching as she carried it away. He hated how his mother was being used, her summon reduced to a tool, her life dictated by others. It could take her days of constant care to regrow a man's lost limb, and yet she was scheduled without rest, sometimes for months on end. Was this her price for having a summon that could not fight? Was this why the authorities treated her like property while giving him special privileges? Like enrolling in Manhattan without a summon? Godfrey clenched his fist. His mother was not a slave. One day everything would be on her terms. But for that, he had to become stronger. With this thought in mind, he closed his eyes. The next moment, he stood in his soul space. His eyes lit up at the familiar sight of the endless white staircase. It was still as mesmerizing as the first time. He appeared. In the first chamber, a wide hall of white stone. At its right end sat Mountain, resting upon a stone throne. His shield leaned against the left armrest, his long sword against the right. When he noticed Godfrey, Mountain rose, armor creaking, before picking up his weapons and kneeling before him. Godfrey placed a hand on the knight's massive pauldron. "Stand up, Mountain." The knight obeyed without hesitation. Godfrey's eyes wandered to the walls. Etched into the stone were drawings. A knight with sword and shield, and beside him, a creature resembling a chameleon, its body twisted with shifting colors. There were other drawings of the beast using the abilities of foes it faced, transforming from prey to predator on several occasions. Ancient texts, unreadable to Godfrey, accompanied the mural, but the drawings alone told enough. So that's what it means, alchemically altered. Mountain wasn't just a human strengthened to slay beasts. He was the product of something far older, far stranger. The chameleon was a chimera, Mountain himself was a primal, but together they were something impossible. A hybrid, a summon that could never exist naturally. And ahead of him stood the second door. Was it another hybrid? He studied the symbol carved into the door. A massive warbow with a lightning bolt etched inside a circle, right where both halves of the door met. From its pillars and design, Godfrey knew it was a door, but it was made of solid stone. Even with Mountain pushing with all his might, it didn't budge. Godfrey finally opened his eyes in the real world. After all his attempts had failed, he rose to his feet and walked toward his bedroom. He needed rest. After such a long journey, it would be better to recover before diving into research about the Green Gate dungeons. They were spreading across the city now, so it wouldn't take long to find details online. Still dwelling on this thought, he opened the door to his room. But the moment he stepped inside, Every instinct screamed in alarm. His body moved before his mind did, summoning Mountain instantly. What's this? The familiar comfort of his bedroom was gone. Instead, Godfrey stood within towering medieval stone walls, their upper corners veiled in age-old cobwebs. The floor beneath his feet was paved with crude, weather-worn blocks. It felt like he had been transported into the bowels of an ancient castle. And 20 meters ahead, two hulking green-skinned beings awaited. Thick, bulging muscles, strained beneath their rough hides. Their ugly faces were made worse by the two thick tusks jutting upward from their gums. Bald-headed and clothed only in crude war skirts of animal hide and bone, they radiated brutality. 7 feet tall, brutish and savage, these were none other than orcs. Godfrey froze. A green dungeon had manifested right inside his room. His bedroom of all places. Only now did the words of the news anchor truly sink in. If green dungeons were this rampant, people weren't just at risk, they were living on borrowed time. Uxis. Less kashish. One of the orcs bellowed in a guttural tongue, brandishing its cudgel. The other mirrored his rage, and both charged. Mountain moved like a tempest. His cloak snapped behind him as he intercepted the first orc's blow, his shield absorbing the impact and reflecting it with such force that the orc's arm shattered. With a swift parry, he turned the second's cudgel aside and slammed an ironclad boot into its chest. The sheer power behind the strike sent the orc crashing into the wall like a ragdoll. As the stunned orc staggered, Mountain crushed the first with a brutal shield bash, the steel rim caving its skull. He spun fluidly, hurling his long sword across the chamber. The blade pierced clean through the chest of the second orc, pinning it against the wall. Kavshi Juvka! A furious roar erupted from above. Another orc leaped from the staircase landing, plummeting down with both feet aimed at Mountain's shield. The collision rang out like thunder, but instead of Mountain falling back, the orc's legs gave way. Bones snapped, blood sprayed, and the creature crumpled in agony. 2 more orcs rushed to join the fray, but Mountain was already upon them. He retrieved his sword mid-charge, parried their wild swings, and cut them down with mechanical precision. Within 2 minutes, all 5 lay dead on the cobbled floor. Godfrey stood frozen, stunned by the towering night before him. Mountain's golden armor gleamed even under streaks of green orc blood. If Godfrey had ever doubted knights before, he didn't now. Mountain wasn't merely a summon, he was a fortress made flesh. The same orcs who could reduce a bodybuilder to pulp had fallen to him like straw before the scythe. Stepping over the corpses to the staircase, Godfrey tilted his head to study his summon more closely. Summoners had unique skills granted through their bonds. Symbiosis allowed them to inherit half their summon's physical strength. Echo, another, allowed them to use their summon's traits or skills directly. Godfrey focused, willing the bond to activate. In an instant, thick golden armor materialized around him, identical to Mountain's. Massive pauldrons crowned his shoulders. A white cloak with the symbol of the sun flowed at his back. For all its bulk, the armor weighed nothing, light as air. No wonder you move so fast. The weight benefits you without slowing you down. Godfrey's eyes widened in realization. His gauntlets gleamed with sharp steel tips. Testing further, he summoned an echo of Mountain's sword and shield. This time, when the weapons manifested, their weight slammed heavily against the stone floor. He could lift the longsword with his enhanced strength, but not the shield. Unlike the armor, the weapons had no weightless blessing. Swinging the sword was possible, it felt like handling 22 kilograms casually, but holding it for long would drain him. With time, his body would fatigue until it felt as if he were wielding 100 kilos. He dismissed the shield, letting it dissolve into golden sparks. Hoisting the long sword over his shoulder with a sharp metallic clink, Godfrey followed Mountain up the staircase to an imposing set of doors. With a thunderous crash, Mountain kicked them open, revealing a grand hallway. Towering weathered pillars lined its length, shadows stretching across the cracked stone floor. For guards awaited within. But these were no ordinary orcs. They stood 8 feet tall, their skins a deep crimson, marked with gray tribal tattoos. Each carried a massive two-handed axe, the double blades resting on the ground as they gripped the hafts with ritual stillness. The moment they saw Godfrey and Mountain, they raised their weapons and advanced with heavy, ground-shaking steps. Like charging rhinos, they swung. Mountain's shield absorbed the brunt, the reflected energy cutting gashes across their forearms. Godfrey surged forward, swinging his long sword in a wide arc. The blade carved clean through the neck of the first red orc, its head tumbling across the stone floor. He twisted away just in time to avoid a crushing swing, deflecting another with a rising cut before shoulder-bashing the foe back. His sword plunged deep into its chest. At the same moment, another blade pierced through from the other side. Mountains. The orc dropped with a shudder. Glancing around, Godfrey realized the knight captain had already dealt with the other two, dispatching them with practiced ease. Mountain flicked the blood from his sword with a single motion, and Godfrey let out a scoffing laugh, though a smile crept onto his face. Felt good. For the first time in 16 years, he wasn't powerless. He had a summon, and fighting alongside it was exhilarating. Another door, Godfrey said, pointing at the looming double gate ahead. Mountain mirrored his stance, sword resting over his shoulder, and followed without hesitation. With a mighty kick, the door blasted open, hinges shrieking as it swung wide. Beyond lay a vast chamber, the boss's lair. Godfrey quickly deactivated Echo, and the armor crumbled away, leaving only the massive longsword in his grip. He was already beginning to feel drained, and that was a terrible sign, because the monstrosity standing in the center of the hall was unlike any orc they had fought before. Beneath the shaft of moonlight pouring through a hole in the ceiling, an 8.5-foot tall orc loomed. Its skin was jet black, its massive frame encased in heavy iron plates. Skull-shaped pauldrons crowned its shoulders, and in its hands rested a gargantuan axe that gleamed under the pale light. Bare feet dug into the stone, and from its tusked jaws hung rings of obsidian black. Long braided locks, woven with beast fangs, trailed from its head like trophies of war. "Evja Cabbages?" the creature rumbled, its voice devoid of emotion. Godfrey sensed it was asking about the fallen orcs outside, though its tone carried no pity, only cold judgment. A shiver ran through him. The aura radiating from this armored orc was suffocating. This has to be an elite tier. He turned to warn Mountain, but the knight was already in motion. The clash shook the entire chamber. A violent airburst rippled outward, sending dust billowing into the air as Mountain intercepted the downward swing of the black orc's axe. Godfrey's hair whipped wildly in the gale. The strike had been aimed at his head. He hadn't even seen the orc move, only the aftermath, and Mountain barely managed to block in time. But the gulf in strength was clear. The axe sank deep into Mountain's shield, neutralizing its reflection. Cracks spidered across the stone beneath Mountain's boots as his feet sank into the floor. The orc's breath came in low, guttural growls. Its bloodshot eyes glowed with murderous hunger. "Mountain, use blackout state now," Godfrey commanded, darting behind a pillar. He couldn't afford to stand in the path of such a beast. At once, the knight's golden armor darkened into a crimson-black sheen, his body radiating killing intent. With a thunderous roar, Mountain forced the orc back and ripped a deep gash across its abdomen. He raised his shield instinctively, catching the next strike without even glancing at it. But Godfrey's heart sank. The wound sealed almost instantly, flesh knitting together as if the cut had never existed. The armored orc roared and stomped forward, slamming its feet against Mountain's shield. The knight slipped aside at the last instant, moving with a grace that defied the weight of his heavy armor. In a blink, Mountain's blade thrust straight through the orc's abdomen, the tip bursting from its back. "Vashbuka!" the black orc bellowed. Dropping its axe, it clamped both massive hands onto Mountain's shoulders, driving him down with raw force until the knight was forced to one knee. A brutal knee strike cracked against Mountain's chin, rattling his helm, followed by a vicious spinning kick that launched him clean through a stone pillar. The impact sent a shower of rubble across the hall. Godfrey's eyes sharpened. "It's reckless because it can regenerate," Unfortunately for you, two can play that game. To the orc's surprise, Mountain rose from the debris, his form remolding itself as cracks in his armor sealed. Even his shield gleamed as if newly forged. Regeneration, but stronger, an unyielding, immortal fortress. Mountain flexed his gauntlet fist, as though savoring the renewed strength, then lifted his shield and charged. The orc reeled back from the collision, just as Godfrey surged forward from behind. He summoned the long sword in an instant, timing his strike perfectly. Mountain slammed the orc's skull sideways with his shield, staggering it off balance. Borrowing that momentum, Godfrey drove his sword clean through the back of its head, the blade bursting out its forehead. The black orc collapsed with a heavy thud that shook the chamber. The boss of the green dungeon lay still at last. Godfrey exhaled sharply. That thing was no ordinary monster, it had been at least a 4.3 elite tier, its strength beyond abnormal. As Mountain's dark cloak shimmered back into pure white, and his armor returned to its golden brilliance, Godfrey turned his gaze toward the dais. Floating above it was a glowing red orb, the dungeon core. It pulsed faintly in the shadows, beyond the touch of moonlight. Worth a fortune on the market. But Godfrey wasn't chasing wealth. He was chasing strength. "It's yours," he told Mountain. The knight ascended the dais and grasped the orb. In a flash, its immense mana dissolved into him, vanishing as though consumed. The surge hit Godfrey instantly. His muscles swelled and tightened, veins humming as if alive. His bones felt denser, his tendons more taut, his very frame stronger. Mountain's power climbed from 3.0 to a staggering 3.2, in just 2 days since being summoned. Godfrey clenched his fist and, on impulse, slammed it into a nearby pillar, tearing a great portion of it off. The stone burst apart, chunks raining across the floor as if some giant beast had bitten into it. "Is this me?" He looked down at his bruised knuckles, but the injury was negligible. Once he used Echo, which would grant him Mountain's gauntlets, he would not be hurt and the damage dealt would multiply. He had seen celebrities and bodybuilders with strong summons lift cars, feats that once felt unreal. But now, experiencing this firsthand, the sensation was intoxicating. Power flowed in him like a living flame, could have gone to his head. It should have made him arrogant. But he had lived too long at the bottom to be blinded by pride. His goal remained clear. He was still far from Siegfried, Snow, Dale, and even Isolde. He wasn't there yet. The chamber dissolved like mist. Stone, blood, and rubble faded until Godfrey stood once more in his bedroom. A punching bag loomed before him, the gloves resting neatly on top. Finally back to the real world. "Mountain, do you feel at peace?" he asked. The towering knight beside him turned sharply, shield raised, sword at the ready. Startled, Godfrey spun toward the doorway. Victoria stood there, her face pale, her chest rising and falling rapidly. The horror in her eyes slowly melted into relief and disbelief. Her heart had nearly given out when she sensed the green dungeon. The moment the boss fell, its leaking energy had allowed her to trace it here. And when she realized the mana signature originated from Godfrey's room, her knees nearly gave way. Gathering courage, she pushed open the door, only to find Godfrey before her, drenched in green blood yet wearing an exhilarated smile. And beside him, a knight. She blinked twice, struggling to process it. Could it be that the dungeon had been abnormally weak? Otherwise, how could Godfrey, the boy who had just awakened a humanoid summon, still be alive? "Godfrey, are you all right?" Victoria asked, in a concerned tone as she approached, just after he told Mountain to calm down. One of the reasons humanoid summons were so looked down on was because the majority of them were golems, clunky and rigid, or worse, the stinking undead skeletons, nothing but brainless puppets for their summoners to control. It made them far weaker than beast summons. Most humanoids lacked good skills and abilities, most had nothing but heavy defense, but compared to the instincts and raw power of beasts, they were pathetically weak. Yet the knight standing beside Godfrey was nothing like that. Mountain wasn't lifeless. He breathed, and each breath carried a low rumble that rolled across the room. pressing into Victoria's chest as if she were standing before a massive beast. His aura alone dwarfed what his tears should produce. Even Godfrey could sense it. Other summons simply grew stronger. But Mountain felt different. He wasn't just growing. He was retracing his steps back to his true peak. And that return would only make his growth even faster. It was like the difference between a beginner paying for the gym to build up strength and a seasoned gym rat returning after months away, strength coming back with frightening speed. Godfrey tugged at his top and peeled it off, revealing the body he had forged through years of martial arts and training. His frame was lean but packed with tone and definition, every muscle a product of sweat and discipline. He had built himself up not for vanity, but so he could at least stand against low-tier summoners. In this society, almost everyone knew how to fight. If he didn't train harder than the rest, he had no chance. Victoria's brows arched. Then she scoffed. "You're fine." She picked up his discarded top and tossed it back at him. "Pull up your pants and go take a bath. I'll inform your mother about the green dungeon gate." "I know you don't want to tell her," Godfrey said with a shrug. "So don't." He turned toward Mountain, half serious, half teasing. "Do you need a bath?" Victoria froze, then shot him a look. "I've seen summons on TV take a bath," he said defensively. "They're not towering 7-foot knights," she replied almost angrily. "It's not necessary. Summons don't smell. Not as long as they return to the soul space." Godfrey smirked and raised a hand. "You may go back." The portal opened, and Mountain bowed his head respectfully before stepping into the circle. The room filled with the echo of clinking metal until the portal closed with a final hum. Victoria's eyes widened. "It's intelligent." "Mountain is." Godfrey's words trailed off. His gaze shifted to the tall window at the far end of his bedroom. From the 3rd floor, he always loved looking outside, whether at sunrise when he woke or at night before he slept. His chest tightened. Roland Daniel's statue, the great statue raised in honor of his father's sacrifice, stood in the distance. Or rather, what was left of it. The statue was headless. Metal constructs clung to its body with ropes, and workers swarmed across it like ants, dismantling piece by piece. From his angle, the buildings hid the figure from the shoulders down, but the desecration was clear enough. "Why are they bringing it down?" he asked, his voice low. Victoria sighed heavily. "It's been there 16 years. The mayor decided to replace it. The Pagoda Guild has been protecting this city and many others around the globe. They've risen to the #1 guild in the world. Honoring them with a statue will win our city their favor." "I see." Godfrey's eyes stayed fixed on the broken monument. His jaw clenched. The guild took everything from dungeons, the cores, the beast parts, the spoils, feeding their guild's growth. But his father had fought for the authorities, risking his life to close dungeons before they broke, shutting gates before chaos spilled out, saving lives without thought of profit. And now they tore down his statue for the sake of a guild. It was like showing the same gratitude to a man who gave you a free ride in his car and to a taxi driver you paid in full. The absurdity made his stomach twist. After a long bath, most of which he spent trying to scrub the anger out of his veins, Godfrey managed to get some rest before dinner. The moment he sat at the dining table, Valentina swept into the sitting room, dropping her bag and approaching him with her usual radiant smile. Victoria brought the dishes to the table just in time to see her boss, still in her white coat from work, wrap her arms around her son's head and smother him into her bosom. Godfrey tilted his chair back and gave her a fake frown. "My baby, why are you frowning at Mummy?" Valentina teased in a playful tone, her voice deliberately cutesy. She kissed his cheeks, his nose, his forehead, ignoring his muffled protests until he groaned. "I'm not angry at you," Godfrey cried out. Telling her he was 16 was pointless. He'd been saying it since he was 14 and it had never once stopped her, not even on his recent birthday. Valentina finally leaned back with a chuckle, brushing his hair back with one hand before settling beside him. "How was school? Did you make any friends?" Godfrey glanced at her, then at Victoria as she set plates before them. He knew his mother was avoiding the topic of his summon, probably believing it would only make him feel worse. His chest grew tight as he remembered how she used to climb to the rooftop just to gaze at his father's statue. How could they do this to her? He thought bitterly. She had carried Amazon on her shoulders alone, and yet the authorities still tore down her husband's memory. She must have petitioned against it. She must have fought and lost. Maybe it was his fault. Maybe if he weren't so weak, his mother wouldn't have to live with that pain. Sweetie, what's wrong? Are you okay? Valentina's voice softened as she caught the flicker of sadness in his eyes. Godfrey quickly forced a smile. I'm fine. Later that night, Godfrey sat at his desk, laptop open, searching for green dungeons. The results poured in by the hundreds, but as he scrolled, he realized most of them were false alarms, paranoid citizens mistaking shadows for danger. Then a notification blinked. A new message. The profile picture was of a young girl with the beauty of a supermodel. Golden white hair spilled across a pillow as soft as a cloud, her golden orange eyes gleaming with an almost divine allure. Godfrey's eyes widened. Isolde. He opened the message. Hey pretty face, we have a competition at the end of the month. Don't miss it. His brows furrowed. How in the world did she get my contact? How did you get my contact? He typed back. Her reply came instantly. I asked the headmaster. Godfrey blinked, stunned. Meanwhile, lying chest first on her bed, Isolde chuckled at the sight of Godfrey's profile picture. A half-face shot taken right after a bath. Could have been a good photo if half his head wasn't cut off. You're not photogenic, she teased. Godfrey groaned, quickly checking the picture. The rest of the chat was her bombarding him with selfies, claiming she was teaching him how to take a proper picture. In truth, all it did was make his cheeks heat up. Her golden eyes glowed warmly, her hair unbound, spilling freely around her face. She looked enchanting this way, far more than the cold, untouchable girl she appeared to be in class. And Godfrey found himself liking this side of her far too much. Chatting with Isolde lifted Godfrey's heart, but when he closed the laptop and gazed out the window at the dark sky and the glittering buildings, his mood soured again. The headless statue stood in the distance, a bitter reminder that refused to fade. Leaning back in his chair, he shut his eyes and slipped into the palace of his soul space. This time he headed straight for the second door, continuing his search for answers. But when he arrived, he froze. The right side of the wall had changed. What was once stone had partially turned into wood. The petrification looked as though it was wearing off. His eyes widened. Mountain's door was already completely wooden, and that was why he could be summoned. If this wall fully transformed, then the second door could be opened. A deep frown formed across his forehead as he thought about what might have caused the shift. Time? No, that didn't feel right. Then it clicked. Mountain had advanced from Tier 3.0 to 3.2. His eyes lit up with realization as he studied the wooden section again, his assumption only solidifying. So, making Mountain grow will grant me access to the second Knight Captain. Folding his arms, Godfrey stood in silence, contemplating his next step, before finally leaving the soul space. The next morning, a taxi rolled down a sloped street lined with high-rise apartments before screeching to a halt. Godfrey climbed out with a backpack slung over his shoulder. He wore strong jeans, a black top, and a dagger strapped to his waist. The blade, forged from dungeon beast bones, was a 2.1 tier weapon capable of slicing through steel with relative ease. That weapon looks dangerous. The shriek made him snap his head left. On the second floor of an apartment, perched on a railing, sat a multilingual parrot. Its beady eyes blinked knowingly at him. A low-tier summon, 1.9 in rank, but infamous for its ability to mimic nearly every language, ancient or modern. Intelligent but an endless nuisance. Before he could respond, a black and white cat padded up behind the parrot and spat a puff of smoke and flame, as though scolding it. Godfrey chuckled quietly. These summons were everywhere. Billions across the globe, rarely exceeding Tier 2.5, and with no growth potential. They were common, harmless background noise compared to real threats. Adjusting his grip on the backpack, Godfrey walked on. This district was nothing like his own. The asphalt was cracked and uneven, the air faintly sour with neglect. His eyes locked onto the 10-story building ahead, the one said to house a company that had shut down more than a decade ago. Everything about it screamed Green Gate Dungeon. The fact that no guild had touched it only confirmed it wasn't dangerous enough to catch their immediate attention. As he moved closer, he passed a courier hauling a massive refrigerator. Or rather, his summon was the warrior ant, nearly the size of a man, carried the 200-liter appliance. Over 160 pounds moved as if weightless. Godfrey kept walking. Soon, he stood before the looming building itself. Stone, heavy slabs dividing each floor like layered fortifications. Buildings like this weren't built anymore. A strip of yellow tape hung limply across the entrance, torn in two. Someone had gone inside. His brow furrowed as his gaze shifted to the nearby street. A vehicle was parked just out of sight. Only one way to know if this is a real dungeon, and if the people in there are summoners. Exhaling, Godfrey pushed the door open. The instant he stepped inside, the world shifted. He was no longer in a dusty apartment block. Instead, he stood in a cavern vast as a football field, its floor littered with nearly 50 massive cocoons of stone. Each one pulsed faintly with deep blue light, as though something alive slumbered within. Above, the cavern's lofty ceiling soared over 100 feet high, riddled with tiny cracks that allowed slivers of sunlight to spill through, pale against the darkness. Godfrey took a step back, but his shoulders hit a wall. He turned. No exit. A typical green dungeon. His eyes narrowed when he spotted 3 figures deeper inside. The first was a hulking man with a shaved head, his thick frame radiating menace. He looked like Dale, older, meaner, more dangerous. The second was a slim man wearing a green beanie, his eyes sharp with a shrewd wolfish gleam. The last was a woman. She wore tight leather, every curve outlined, a crimson whip strapped to her waist that matched the fiery color of her hair. The way the 2 men hung around her made it clear, whether through leadership or seduction, she was the one pulling their strings. Godfrey's lips tightened. It didn't matter. Whoever they were already in this dungeon. He summoned Mountain instantly. Normal people didn't just walk into a dungeon. These 3 had come deliberately, and he knew exactly why. The dungeon core. You walked into a green dungeon with a golem knight? Are you a fool, or just naive? The hulking man sneered, his deep voice booming across the cavern. Kids these days? Natasha spat, eyes flashing with something personal. They think they're brave, but they just end up dead. TSK. Leave this place, brat! The big man growled, veins bulging along his thick neck. Godfrey tilted his head back toward the wall behind him, then looked at the man again as if to say, Can't you see there's no exit? The unspoken jab only made the brute's face twist with anger. But before he could roar again, the beanie-wearing man unfortunately stepped on a small stone that sank inwards. The cavern shook. A heavy thud echoed, like something massive had just dropped from above. Godfrey bolted forward, eyes fixed on the far end of the cavern. Beyond the maze of cocoons lay an open stretch, a set of stairs, and finally a massive door. Natasha and her men sprinted too, all of them racing for the same goal. The cocoons began to pulse brighter, their rocky shells cracking, pieces falling away. One burst open beside Godfrey, unleashing a towering werewolf, 7 feet of black fur and raw muscle. Its snout jutted forward, teeth like daggers, claws 4 inches long. Its inverted legs coiled with explosive strength as it lunged. But Mountain was faster. He moved to Godfrey's left, slamming his great oval shield into the beast. The werewolf was hurled sideways, its body crashing into the floor. Mountain stomped after it without hesitation, his ironclad boot crushing its skull into blood and pulp. Natasha's eyes widened. That's a golem? Shock flickered across her face, but she quickly snapped a look at her men. Godfrey was gaining ground, too quickly. Now, she barked. The brute summoned a massive hound, like a Rottweiler on steroids. Muscles rippled under its hide, its shoulders towering 6 feet high. The beanie-wearing man responded with a black direwolf, leaner, built for speed, its sharp eyes fixed on Godfrey. The trio turned back toward the huge door, shoving it open as their beasts tore across the cavern floor straight toward him. Godfrey used Echo, and Mountain's long sword appeared in his hand. In the same breath, he used Exchange. Mountain appeared in his spot and charged at the giant dog and the dire wolf, barreling through them like a tank. While the lightweight effect made Mountain move as if he wore no armor, others certainly felt the burn of his weight, and naturally the canines couldn't even slow him down. Mountain increased his speed as Natasha and her goons had almost sealed the door shut. Meanwhile, Godfrey's heart thundered harder than it ever had before. As he sprinted toward the door, nearly 50 werewolves thundered behind him. One lunged from above, he spun, slicing off its arm before the claws could rip into his back. But that left him open. 2 more closed in much faster than the first. Godfrey spun the long sword in a full arc, carving through their chests, then used the momentum of the blade's weight to hurl himself forward. Yet before he could land properly, a wolf crashed onto him, teeth snapping. His eyes widened. He could hear the horde gaining ground. He was going to die. Was this it? No. His long sword was useless at this range, and his left forearm was already being bitten into. But he covered it with an Echo gauntlet and vambraces. Die! Godfrey roared, slamming his right fist with such force into the werewolf's snout that its head snapped violently to the side. Stunned, it refused to release him. Snarling back, Godfrey seized its head with both hands and snapped its neck. He tore himself free, stomped another werewolf in the chest to knock it back, then bolted up the staircase. Grabbing a spear from a skeleton along the way, he rushed inside just as Mountain slammed the door shut and jammed it with the spear. Not even a heartbeat later, the door shook violently as dozens of werewolves crashed against it. Their howls pierced his ears. Had they been a fraction of a second slower, he would have been torn apart. The risk of entering a dungeon was real. One mistake meant a true death. Wow, I've never seen a humanoid summon that good, Natasha said with a smirk, as if she hadn't just tried to orchestrate his death. You're a good summoner. Maybe someday you can join my group. Her nonchalant, dismissive tone toward her own treachery twisted Godfrey's expression into disgust and searing fury. His jaw clenched. Brat, no hard feel. The big man didn't finish. Mountain moved before anyone expected it, even Godfrey. A flash of steel, and the giant dog's head rolled across the ancient floor, blood spraying as its body collapsed. The big man's mouth bulged. Blood erupted from it. His eyes rolled white before he collapsed face first, dust rising around his body. Summoner and summon, down in a blink. One dead, the other unconscious. You don't have to give the order, Prince Godfrey. Mountain's voice rumbled, hoarse and dark, as if imbued with thunder. Everyone could tell he forced himself to speak, judging from the rage laced in his tone. The sound froze everyone, even Godfrey. The dire wolf lunged at him, but Mountain raised his shield, flinging the beast back against the door. He hurled his long sword after it with enough force to pierce straight through the thick wood, the blade jutting out the other side. The beanie man swapped places with his wolf at the last second, narrowly dodging death. The dire wolf lunged again, sinking its jaws into Mountain's right vambrace. The knight captain lifted the beast overhead and slammed it into the stone with such force that the cavern trembled. The wolf whined pitifully before Mountain snapped its neck. The beanie man lunged at Godfrey with 2 daggers, malice gleaming in his eyes. He had realized the truth. Godfrey was the weak link. If he fell, they might survive. He closed the gap in a blur only to freeze. Blood spurted from his lips as his body shuddered, then collapsed right before Godfrey. Godfrey barely had time to breathe when instinct screamed at him. He leaned hard to the side as a huge tongue lashed past him like a whip. Whipping around, he saw it. A 4-foot-tall dark green frog with a pale underbelly. Its tongue snapped out again impossibly fast. Godfrey couldn't dodge this one, but Mountain stood before him. The tongue struck his armor, splattering saliva. Natasha's eyes narrowed. This brat! Mountain's gauntlet closed around the tongue. With a roar, he yanked the frog off the ground. Mid-air, it bloated grotesquely, swelling into an 8-foot sphere. It smashed Mountain into the ground with an impact that shook the cavern. Dust and rock rained from above. The swollen beast bounced, dragging Mountain with its tongue, and hurled him into the wall with such speed the collision echoed before Godfrey could react. That was a bloating venomous frog, tier 4.5. An elite 3.5 beast with the potential to reach 5.0. I never knew you had a few tricks up your sleeve. Natasha's whip unfurled, slick with her summon's venom, glowing faintly as she brandished it. She smiled cruelly. I'll enjoy watching you turn into a ball. Godfrey tightened his grip on the long sword, echo-clad armor enclosing his body. The great helm's slit narrowed his view, but his gaze burned through it. Who said I have just a few tricks? Mountain's armor turned deep crimson as he entered blackout state. But he wasn't the only one. Godfrey's armor burned crimson as well, his white scarab bleeding into black, pupils glowing a dark, furious red. Strength surged through him, his veins like conduits of bestial blood. The stone beneath his boots imploded as he charged. Natasha snapped her whip down with such force that the very air screamed. If there was one thing Godfrey had learned about his summon, it was that the armor made him a living fortress, a tank with the speed of a destrier. And as he charged, Natasha's whip struck his armor several times, the sharp cracks echoing in the cavern. But it did nothing, not even a shallow gash. He arrived before her, swinging his sword in a broad horizontal slash. She ducked swiftly, lashing at his foot to trip him to the ground, but yelped the moment her whip struck. His foot felt like a boulder. Godfrey swung his sword backward in a savage arc, forcing Natasha to dodge again. Her whip lashed out once more, this time coiling tightly around the thick chainmail guarding his neck. She yanked with all her strength, the whip tightening like a serpent. With a grunt, Godfrey seized it with his gauntlet hand and pulled. The force was so great Natasha was ripped off her feet, hurtling toward him. Roaring, Godfrey swung his long sword backward in a diagonal strike that tore across her body. Blood sprayed against his pauldron and helm, splattering down his cloak as Natasha's body fell limp. Just then, the bloating venomous frog exploded. Mountain had turned the beast's venom against it, yet an even stronger version which it was not immune to, causing the monster to swell beyond its limit and rupture. The detonation shook the ground. Each step Mountain took afterward was like a block of wrought iron being dropped onto stone, his heavy boots pounding with merciless rhythm. The huge knight advanced, lifting his sword and shield, and stood before Godfrey, who remained frozen, staring at Natasha's corpse. Standing there clad in massive armor, broad golden pauldrons, and a regal floating cloak, Godfrey was a sight to behold, a knightly figure born of myth. But within the confines of his helmet, his own face twisted through a storm of emotions, horror, fear, and finally grim acceptance. He had killed someone, taken a life, something he had never truly imagined doing. Shutting his eyes tight, he let the weight crash over him, his breaths ragged, his body trembling as though his very height had grown heavier under invisible chains. He hadn't meant to kill, but this was the brutal truth of battle within. Dungeon's mercy meant death. She had died because if he had hesitated, it would have been him lying lifeless in her place. The victor was always the one who survived. Resting his long sword against his pauldron with a soft metallic clink, like a coin dropping onto stone, he turned his helm toward Mountain. You could speak, and you didn't tell me? Mountain looked at him. For a painfully long second, silence hung in the air. Then, slowly, the towering knight gave one soft nod. Godfrey exhaled, hot breath rushing against the confines of his helm. With a swivel of his body, he strode into the shadowed depths of the cavernous hall. Mountain followed silently behind, both of them still in blackout state. The transformation drained their mana at a frightening rate, but Godfrey didn't care. He knew he couldn't handle whatever lay beyond without it. Now that Mountain had copied the bloating venomous frog's innate bloating venom ability, perhaps they had a little more hope against what awaited. At the end of the cavernous hall was a ravine. It stretched downward into darkness, a pit of unknown depth. Godfrey narrowed his eyes. He had to clear this dungeon. Go first. Mountain nodded and leapt. His massive form plummeted with a heavy crash, his armor groaning as he rose. At once, a werewolf lunged out of the shadows. But this one was different. Rotting flesh clung loosely to its body, and half its face was stripped down to exposed skull. An undead werewolf. Mountain met it with a shield strike that slammed the beast into the cavern wall. Its decayed body swelled grotesquely before bursting apart into limbs and blood. Two more came rushing, but Godfrey dove down, his blade skewering one clean through the head as he landed. Mountain deflected the second, its claws scraping furiously at his shield until its arm swelled and fell limp. With a brutal thrust, he drove his sword through its chest. Together they pressed forward, Mountain charging with shield raised high. Any undead werewolf that came within reach fell in a strike or two, a feat impossible for him in his normal state. Godfrey's task was to finish what Mountain left crippled but not slain. After more than 20 kills, they stumbled into an underground circular hall. 6 towering pillars ringed the space, and in its center, a crimson core pulsed atop a small stone platform. Above, the ceiling shimmered like a sheet of crystal-clear water suspended in midair. It somehow remained unfallen, glowing faintly and casting the only light, a phantom moon that illuminated the shadows. As Mountain advanced, something darted from behind a pillar, a black blur that smashed into his shield with colossal force, driving him backward. The blur twisted and slashed toward Godfrey, who raised his blade but was sent crashing into a pillar. Revealed in the crimson glow, the blur was a towering werewolf. Unlike the others, it stood fully upright on 2 legs, its massive chest and arms bulging with muscle, long lupin ears twitching, yellowed fangs bared, and claws black as obsidian. The Werewolf King. Mountain roared and slammed it against the wall, debris raining down from the ceiling. He swung in retaliation, but his blade cut only shallowly. The beast retaliated, its claws raking across his helm and leaving 3 jagged gashes before hurling him into a pillar. The stone cracked like spiderwebs before collapsing. Godfrey charged, gathering momentum, but the beast's palm swung with terrifying speed. He activated exchange, switching places with Mountain. The knight blocked the blow while Godfrey slashed from the other side. His sword bit into the werewolf's arm, breaking skin but halting against muscles so dense they felt like steel cords. Not even the venom of the bloating frog worked. The Werewolf King had speed, power, and a natural defense far beyond anything they had faced. This wasn't a skill, it was raw, natural construction. Something Mountain could never copy. Godfrey's eyes shrank in dread as he retreated, but the beast was faster. Its massive foot slammed into his cuirass, the impact hurling him through a pillar. His armor saved his life. Without it, he would have been crushed. "Come to me!" Mountain roared. His voice scraped the air, forced from his throat like jagged steel grinding over stone. The Werewolf King halted, tilting its head curiously at the knight who, by all rights, could not wound it. Mountain charged. Expecting the usual shield bash, the beast swung, but Mountain ducked, his blade glowing. For the first time, he unleashed a strike not of steel, but of mana. A beam of light erupted upward, tearing into the Werewolf King, cutting deep, almost cleaving its body in 2. His armor crumbled as his mana was spent. On the floor, he stared at Mountain, battered and dented, yet unbroken. "Prince Godfrey," Mountain rasped, kneeling on one knee. "If it hurts to speak, then don't," Godfrey answered, realizing how much strain it caused him. "Go. Take the core." Mountain nodded, stepped forward, and grasped the crimson core. Mana coursed through his body in glowing streams. His frame grew slightly taller, broader, and heavier. Godfrey blinked as the tablet updated, his lips curling. "Summon. Knight Captain of the Golden Order type. Hybrid tier. 3.4 potential." 6.0 Mountain had reached the pinnacle of the low tier in only days. 3 weeks later, Godfrey stepped once again into the hallway of Manhattan High School, a bag slung casually over his shoulder. The moment he appeared, the hallway crowded with freshmen and sophomores fell into silence. "It's him," The hero's son. He's back. Why is he here? I thought he ran with his tail between his legs after realizing Manhattan wasn't for him. Something's changed. Look at his eyes. You're right. Godfrey's gaze locked onto Snow, who leaned against the wall. A beautiful first year shyly stood before him with a present in her hands, while his cronies, Siegfried and Maldred, lingered like bodyguards. The conversation had clearly been about Snow and the bold freshman. But the instant Godfrey entered, everything shifted. Snow raised an eyebrow, his smile as sharp as it was radiant. How's your head? Siegfried hit it really hard. I hope it's okay. His angelic grin was like an arrow, piercing straight through the hearts of every girl watching. They maintained eye contact for a while before Godfrey shrugged. It's fine, he said, almost walking past them when Siegfried grabbed him. His skin hardened, transforming into green jade, and he slammed Godfrey against the wall. A malicious grin spread across his face as he leaned close. I'm not done with you. You'll pay for that punch. Godfrey raised an eyebrow, recalling the cafeteria fight where Isolde had helped him nullify Siegfried's connection to his summon. Siegfried chuckled softly, towering over him with his lean, wolfish physique. His dark blue school jacket stretched tight across his muscles. Where's your pretty knight? I'd love to see him save your pitiful. Get off. Godfrey's cold reply made Maldred, standing behind Siegfried with his hands buried in his pockets, chuckle. A vein popped on Siegfried's temple. Godfrey grabbed his arm and wrenched it off, shocking Siegfried. He was about to clench his fist when a sharp sting ran up his wrist where Godfrey held. Then their eyes met again. Siegfried froze. His bravado faltered. Godfrey's gaze wasn't the same as before. It was predatory, sharp, the eyes of someone who had killed and survived battles where death lingered close. Just where had Godfrey been for the past 3 weeks? As he turned to walk away, Maldred lunged, only to be halted by Snow's command. Let him go. Fights should wait for the competition in a few days. Snow's narrowed eyes followed Godfrey's departing figure. We'll have the opportunity to teach some people their places. His lips curled faintly. He already sensed the change in Godfrey. Clearly, the boy had entered a dungeon. But it didn't matter, the disparity between their summons was too great. And in a few days, once the competition began, Godfrey would learn the harsh truth. That talent and hard work weren't equal. Hard work, adored by the weak, only sharpened the advantage of the strong. Why did you leave him? Maldred scoffed. Siegfried shoved him aside, glaring at Godfrey's back. I'll kill you. The moment Godfrey stepped into the classroom, he spotted Dale sitting on a desk, surrounded by a cluster of boys and girls. Other students kept to themselves, reading, scrolling on their phones, or napping. His eyes passed over them and locked onto the girl he'd been chatting with for the past 3 weeks. Isolde. She leaned against the window frame, earpods in both ears, lost in rhythm as she stared outside. But when Godfrey drew back his chair and sat, as if pulled by an invisible thread, she turned. Without thinking, Godfrey expected her beautiful smile to brighten his day, as it always had in their chats. But instead, Isolde frowned. His chest tightened. His heart pounded once, loudly. Then, removing her earpods, she rose gracefully, placed one hand on his desk, and brushed his blonde hair back with her manicured fingers. Her glossy lips curled into a pout. You got into a fight, didn't you? Your hair's ruffled, hiding those nice blue eyes of yours. When she finished rearranging it, a proud smile lit her porcelain face. There's the pretty face I haven't seen for 3 weeks. Godfrey chuckled. That smile, Dale wanted nothing more than to rip it off his face. His jaw clenched, his expression darkening. Dale's not happy. Look at his face. Some students whispered. Is that surprising? Isolde's the only second year invited into the Nexus Club and crowned queen in her first month. Even the 4th years acknowledge her as Manhattan's greatest talent. She's hot property. Dale's not the only one after her, even the numbered in the Nexus Club, the top upperclassmen, have their eyes on her. At another desk, Cecil's eyes narrowed. The word King Tyr flashed in her mind whenever she looked at Godfrey. Even if it was just a rumor, why had it come from the lips of the woman who assessed summons upon awakening? She had to dig deeper. As the school's news writer, this story was too juicy to ignore. If the rumor was wrong, Godfrey would be ruined. But if it was true, she'd expose the biggest secret Manhattan staff was hiding. Not that she cared about him, whether he was crushed or not was irrelevant. Just then, Snow strode into the classroom with his lackeys, his expression shifting when he saw Isolde leaning casually on Godfrey's desk. Manhattan's queen. He clenched his fist. How could she humiliate the entire school by leaving her seat to stand by the desk of a humanoid summoner? Teacher Edwin walked in right after and stood at the lectern. Apologies, I spilled coffee on my shirt. That's why I'm 20 minutes late. His tone was flat as he dramatically cleared his throat and flipped open his notes. With the competition around the corner, the one that will decide your points and possibly the next valedictorian, all rests on your summons. Today's topic: innate and adaptive skills. He paused, scanning the room. I'll focus on adaptive skills, since innate ones are fixed from the moment your summon manifests. So, Godfrey zoned out, as did his partner in crime, Isolde. Later, Godfrey walked into the cafeteria side by side with Isolde, his hands buried in his pockets. She ordered chocolate cake for both of them along with a few extras, and they carried the tray to a corner table. You've been to a dungeon, haven't you? Godfrey asked once they sat. Isolde lifted an eyebrow. What makes you say that? The moment I saw Snow, you and Dale, I understood what set you apart from the rest. You faced life and death battles. You forged stronger bonds with your summons. Isolde took a small bite of her cake, savoring the sweetness before answering. You're saying you understand why people like us look down on others like they're insignificant? The difference was obvious the moment I stepped in, Godfrey replied. It's like a fully grown dog against a puppy. By the way, I've been meaning to ask. The wyvern isn't your only summon, is it? Oh, Isolde stopped eating. And what makes you think that? Wyverns can't cut a summoner's bond with their summon, or banish the mana that strengthens the summoner's body. You'd have to be incredibly strong with such a summon. I'm an 8.5 summoner, she said simply. Godfrey's pupils shrank. What? You lost your courage? She teased. Godfrey leaned back, eyes burning with determination. Once he opened the second door, I'm still coming for the valedictorian. His declaration echoed across the cafeteria just as a strange silence fell. Turning his head, he saw a silver-haired, handsome boy enter, with a dark-haired Asian student at his side. Is Godfrey insane? He says that on the very day of this semester Manhattan's king decides to visit the cafeteria? A student whispered in disbelief. Godfrey's eyes met John's and, in an instant, it felt as though he were an ant staring up at an elephant. The sheer pressure the boy gave off by just standing there was overwhelming, an intimidating presence that bent the atmosphere itself. No one dared meet John's gaze directly. He was the kind of person who made people lower their eyes instinctively, as though looking at him too long was an offense. John gave a soft nod at Isolde, his eyes sliding past Godfrey as if he didn't exist, and then walked straight toward Snow with the Asian boy beside him. Care to talk? John asked, his tone even but carrying an unshakable weight. For the first time, Godfrey watched the proud Snow rise from his seat without his usual smirk, pride, or nonchalance. His face was serious. Where? Snow asked. I'll show you, John replied, turning on his heel without sparing anyone else a glance. Dale froze for a second, expecting the king would at least acknowledge him. But John didn't even spare him a look. The cafeteria buzzed. Everyone knew what John's presence meant. It wasn't just about the Nexus Club. This was about grooming. Everyone whispered that Snow might be chosen, groomed to become the next Manhattan king once he advanced into junior year. That's someone worthy of a king tier. And yet, he isn't even a lord tier. Do you see the difference, Godfrey Daniels? Cecil thought, her eyes darting toward Godfrey. She caught his gaze, and he raised an eyebrow at her, puzzled at the look she gave him. That's Manhattan's king? Godfrey asked Isolde, keeping his voice low. She nodded twice. He is quite strong, with a summon that gives him an incredible advantage. When he was just a sophomore, he hospitalized 70% of his classmates. What? Godfrey's eyes narrowed in disbelief. Forget about him, I've got a problem, Isolde said suddenly, catching his attention. Godfrey blinked. What could possibly be a problem for a 16-year-old Lord Tier Summoner? I've been exercising at the school's field every morning for a week now, and I do not like the way Dale stares at me. It's best if you join me tomorrow morning. I need protection. Her ridiculous excuse made Godfrey roll his eyes. And you need to exercise. Summoners with good physiques always have the edge. The way I see it, I'm helping you, she added with a sly smile. Godfrey scoffed. I thought you weren't staying in the dormitories. Well, the headmaster couldn't leave his precious student outside the academy grounds for too long. Not with news of dungeons and cane fanatics on the rise, Isolde replied smoothly. Come on, it's a win-win. You can't say no. I'll be there. What time? 4 a.m. Godfrey accepted, knowing full well it was just an excuse to have a training partner. Still, it would give him the chance to learn more about Lord Tier Summoners. But her words lingered with him. 2 summoners had changed the world forever. Not just cities or regions, the entire world. The first was Adam, the very first summoner. His summon could clear a red gate in minutes, what took others weeks or months. Worse, it could split itself into many, clearing multiple dungeons at once. It rode the clouds, crushed mountains with its staff, mimicked other summons and wielded their innate and adaptive skills. It was a monster beyond monsters. The second was Cain, a man from Patmos. Years after Adam vanished, Cain rose with a twisted desire to become God. When the dungeons first appeared, the world entered the 5 years of great despair. 2 billion lives were lost. Cities crumbled. Continents bled as wastelands spread due to nuclear warheads. Cain brought the second calamity, Blood March. He slaughtered millions who refused to kneel, building a fanatical army. Cities either bowed and worshipped him, or drowned in their own blood. Like Adam, Cain was unstoppable. Even nuclear strikes couldn't bring down his summon. For 10 long years, he reigned as an untouchable tyrant until finally, the 7 great cities united to defeat him, Manhattan among them. Technically New Manhattan, since the original was destroyed a century ago. The next morning, when the fog still blanketed the campus field, Godfrey found Isolde waiting on a bench. She wore a gray hoodie, gray leggings, and white sneakers. Isolde, he called as he approached. She didn't react. He said her name again. Little louder. Still nothing. Finally, walking right in front of her, he noticed the earpods tucked in her ears. Her eyes widened when she saw him, so she removed them. What were you listening to? Godfrey asked, crossing his arms. Shooting Star. Don't you know her? She's a famous old-time singer. I got to know about her from my mom. She placed one earpod into his left ear, and at once the melody flowed into him. His eyes narrowed. The voice was captivating, soothing, and melancholic at once. While basking in the song, they began jogging together. Godfrey didn't spot Dale, but he already knew the boy wouldn't appear. He wasn't a threat to Isolde. When the song ended, it was as if the softer part of Isolde faded with it. Her expression sharpened. I want to see how strong you've grown, she said, suddenly picking up her pace. Godfrey gritted his teeth and followed, pushing harder. He gained ground but never closed the gap. Isolde's strides remained steady, her breathing light, while his speed tore at his lungs and made the fog vaporize against his skin. For an hour he pushed himself to the edge, until finally he collapsed onto the grass, panting like a beast that had just outrun death. Isolde stood above him, barely winded. A light sheen of sweat glistened on her forehead, but her breathing was even. In contrast, Godfrey's shirt clung to him, soaked through with sweat. Unfortunately, their first class that day was training back on the same field. Godfrey's thighs still screamed from earlier. Had he known, he might have gone to the nurse. Isolde, Snow, and Dale led the front while Godfrey trailed behind the rest, his legs trembling so violently he nearly collapsed multiple times. Wow, just look at him, Siegfried mocked loudly. You should have stayed home, Godfrey. This is pitiful. Their jeers didn't stop even after everyone else had finished and collapsed onto the grass. Godfrey kept running. You can make it, Dale shouted mockingly, drawing laughter from the group. But Isolde didn't laugh. She stood silently at the track's edge, her eyes following him. When Godfrey finally completed his laps, collapsing to his knees, she rushed forward with a bottle of water. Of course, he needs a woman to— Shut it, Siegfried, the instructor snapped, cutting him off. He turned to the others, his voice cold. While he trained non-stop in the early hours of the morning, you all slept. Yet he still finished the task that left you sprawled on the ground like you'd achieved something. You're the ones making a mockery of yourselves. Dale's face twisted, heat rushing to his cheeks. He had just been publicly shamed and worse, shamed because of Godfrey. Because of trash. Why hadn't Godfrey said anything? Was his silence deliberate, to make fools out of them all? Fury twisted inside him. With a roar, Dale slammed his fist into the ground, shattering it. His hand sank deep into the earth as dust and soil sprayed outward. In the classroom, as everyone now clad themselves in uniforms, white long-sleeve shirts beneath good-looking dark blue jackets, long ties and black pants, with skirts for the females, the tension in the air was as thick as a rolling storm cloud. Move! Dale roared from behind, and a great number of students scampered to their seats like rats scattering at the sudden switch of a light. He strode into the classroom and sat heavily on the front desk, arms crossed, jaw clenched, his presence alone commanding silence. Orwin, one of his lackeys, leaned against the wall near the window, feigning ease but his eyes constantly flicking toward his leader. Cecil, on the other hand, sat calmly in her chair, but her sharp gaze betrayed the quiet anticipation bubbling within. Just then, Godfrey entered the class, gulping down water from a bottle as Isolde walked at his side. The moment Dale laid eyes on him, a spark of fury surged. Literal lightning burst from his fingers, striking the bottle. The electricity coursed into the water, turning it into a conduit and sending sharp currents through Godfrey's body. The shock made him grunt, muscles tightening, pain coursing through every nerve. Had he been a normal human, he would have collapsed into unconsciousness, ending up being sent to the school nurse. Crackling arcs of lightning danced along Dale's fists as he rose from the desk, his thick neck popping as he tilted it left and right. I was insulted because of why, but the words choked in his throat. A sudden presence fell upon him, oppressive and suffocating, like an invisible weight pressing down on every inch of his body. He could barely breathe, let alone move. It was the aura of a Lord Tyr. His trembling eyes shifted, and he saw Isolde, her calm expression distorted into something sharp and furious. Godfrey, meanwhile, tossed the empty bottle neatly into the bin and walked straight to his seat without uttering a word. Isolde's gaze lingered on Dale for only a moment longer before she turned her eyes away. Only then did he feel the crushing weight lift from his body. You hide behind a woman? Dale spat through clenched teeth, trembling in rage, his eyes burning holes into Godfrey, who sat tapping a finger against his desk in infuriating calm. His mouth should have been damaged, his body twitching from the lightning, but he sits there without even a flicker of pain in his eyes? Has he grown that much in just 1 month? Cecil frowned deeply, her calculating gaze sharpening. Isolde exhaled with a sigh. Dale! Her sweet voice rang through the class, beautiful even when edged with anger. But her eyes were merciless. Sit down. Dale's eyes widened. He clenched his fists so tight the veins in his arms bulged, but despite his pride, his legs carried him back to his seat like a chained dog. He hated it, but he knew it. Isolde was stronger. That was the unfair truth. The competition is near. Let's see how you'll protect him then. Snow muttered lazily, leaning back with an air of disinterest. But Isolde ignored him entirely. Instead, she brought out her earpods, rose from her chair, and gently slid one into Godfrey's ear. She could see the storm raging in his eyes, barely restrained fury, tempered only by sheer willpower. The competition is just a few days away. Let the leash around your anger loose on that day. Her whisper was soft, Godfrey glanced at her from the corner of his eye. In the department where the staff lounged and sipped their drinks, conversation about the upcoming competition ran lively. The sophomores this year, the school nurse said with enthusiasm, have talents we haven't seen in a long while. That's true, someone nodded. Edwin, you're in charge of that class. Who do you think will win this month? All eyes turned toward Edwin, who merely shrugged. Isolde, Snow, and Dale. Those three are definitely above the others. Isolde will undoubtedly come first, Snow second, and Dale third. Cecil is strong, but she can't really match Dale. There might be a dark horse in that class, the combat instructor said, leaning back with a knowing look. Like you said, the sophomores are full of talent. Nothing is set in stone until the day itself. Edwin raised a brow, puzzled. And who's this dark horse? The instructor only took a sip of his coffee. You'll see. A few days later, the day of the competition arrived. A grand white arena stood proudly at the center of the campus, large enough to hold the roar of a few hundred. The stands were filled with students, freshmen, sophomores, and even upperclassmen who had come to watch the rising talents. The freshman competition was still months away, many of them still adjusting to their summons, but the sophomore matches always carried weight. Rivalries, pride, and the eyes of the academy hung heavy on the arena. The referee, standing tall before the vast platform, hollered with a thunderous voice. First contenders, Godfrey Daniels and Maldred Brown. Godfrey stepped out, eyes narrowing as the sun bore down on him and hundreds of gazes fell upon his back. The pressure should have been immense, but his thoughts circled only around one fact. He was chosen first, and his opponent was none other than one of Snow's lackeys. It was clear they wanted to weed out the weak early. And who else to put on the chopping block but the boy who awakened late, the one whispered to be the weakest sophomore, the one who awakened with freshmen. Among the freshmen, there wasn't a shred of respect in their eyes. Some sighed, already disappointed. Others leaned forward, eager to see him humiliated. After all, Godfrey had been foolish enough to clash with the top boys of the class. To them, he was a moth flying into fire. But the truth was simple. The top boys had demanded respect, and Godfrey had refused to bow. For that alone, he became their enemy. Maldred ascended the platform from the south while Godfrey approached from the north. They stood 30 meters apart, and yet the platform still had space for giants to battle. We finally meet, and your shield is way over there? Maldred sneered, pointing at Isolde seated in the audience. She was easy to spot, for no one dared sit within 5 seats of her in any direction. Her isolation was a throne of its own. I remember the punch you gave me when I first came here, Godfrey said, sliding his hands from his pockets. And I remember the spikes. But today, I'll show you mercy. You'll show me mercy? Me? Maldred's cocky grin twisted into fury as a portal bloomed beside him. From it stepped a 5-foot-tall beast. Its 3 pairs of steel-tipped tusks gleamed under the sun, its mane of quills bristling like spears, its burning red eyes, wild and savage. The referee's voice boomed. Iron-tusked porcupine boar elite tier, 4.2. Bring out your knight, Maldred taunted. Behind Godfrey, a golden diagram of intricate symbols appeared, glowing so bright it seemed to rival the sun. From it came the sound of heavy metallic clinks, like chains falling onto stone. The arena became silent as an armored figure stepped forth. Maldred's pupils shrank, his grin faltering, as the shadow of mountain loomed across the arena floor. Was that always how it looked? The mountain everyone saw on the day of awakening just a month ago was nothing compared to the hunk of living steel standing before them now. He had grown from 7 feet tall to a towering 7.5. The fan-shaped, metal crest, bearing the motif of a blazing golden sun, had sprouted from the crown of his great helm. 3 thick spikes, each as wide as 2 fingers pressed together, jutted from his massive pauldrons. One stabbing upward like a spear, another thrust forward as if to impale any foe foolish enough to be shoulder-checked, and the last stabbing backward in ruthless defiance. Both pauldrons had transformed into lethal weapons in their own right. His heavy cloak billowed as he brandished his great oval shield and long sword. The sight of him was no longer that of a mere knight summon. He looked every inch the image of a royal knight captain, radiating both the majesty and the suffocating terror of his order. What in the world? That's not how it looked a month ago. Cecil's eyes narrowed, disbelief flashing across her face. Knight Captain of the Golden Order. Elite tier, for .0, the referee bellowed. He knew the name because the students were required to provide full summon details to the school's staff. It was an odd name, but nobody cared about that now. All eyes widened at the revelation of Mountain's tier. A month ago he had been a mere low-tier 3.0 summon. Now he stood as a 4.0 elite tier. That was shocking enough, but what unsettled them most was how. This was a humanoid summon, infamous for its painfully slow growth rate. Yet somehow Mountain had surpassed even beast summons, growing at an impossible pace. Feeding him dungeon cores was the obvious theory, but even that explanation didn't fit. A low-tier summon usually required months to digest that amount of core. This one had done it in a single month. Maldred gritted his teeth, fury bubbling. His iron-tusked porcupine boar bristled, then fired quills the size of arrows at Mountain. The deadly projectiles clattered harmlessly against the knight captain's steel hide, bouncing off with dull, mocking chimes of metal on metal. Mountain did not slow. His strides grew longer, faster, a juggernaut accelerating toward the beast. Panic flared in Maldred's eyes as his summon unleashed another hailstorm of iron-infused quills. These quills were strong enough to punch through vehicles with ease, yet Mountain raised his shield, and the damage reflected. Slashes and punctures tore open on the boar's hide, blood spattering as if the beast had impaled itself. With a squeal of rage, it lowered its reinforced tusks and charged, no longer in control of its fury. Golden lightning suddenly crackled across Mountain's armor, coursing through his body like divine fire. Gasps erupted from the stands. "That's lightning infusion!" someone shouted. It was an adaptive skill, learned to counterbalance the burden of his colossal mass. No one expected a tank to move with the speed of a motorcycle, and as predicted, the porcupine boar had no chance to react when Mountain vanished from its tusk's path and reappeared at its flank. Before the beast could whip its head around, Mountain slammed his colossal shield into its skull. The impact met the tusk at the same instant the beast tried to snap forward. A resounding crack split the air. One of the boar's thickest tusks snapped clean, while the monster itself was hurled backward like a broken doll. It smashed into the stone platform with a deafening crash, fractures spider webbing across the stage as dust billowed upward. But Maldred wasn't finished. With a snarl, he darted past Mountain, his eyes locked on Godfrey, who stood calmly at the edge of the platform, arms crossed. Godfrey's passive, unbothered expression ignited Maldred's fury all the more. Iron spikes erupted from Maldred's palms, each 6 inches long and razor-sharp. He raised his arm to strike, but froze. An oppressive killing intent bore down on him from behind, suffocating in its weight. The very air split as something cleaved through it, the sound shrill and deadly, and every hair on Maldred's body rose in terror. Instinct saved him as he ducked. Mountain's long sword came down like a thunderbolt, plunging deep into the stone floor, splitting it as though it were no stronger than parchment. The blade sank halfway into the platform, the impact rattling teeth across the arena. How can something this big move that fast? Maldred's pupils shrank, horror painting his face. He knew of lighting infusion, but only someone affiliated with the element could learn that skill. Mountain was already upon him, his shield raised high. If that weapon came down, it would not just break bones, it would kill him. He rolled desperately forward, spikes bursting from his palm as he cursed Godfrey with every breath. But before he could strike, a gauntlet backhand met his face. The blow was casual, almost lazy. Yet the force sent Maldred sailing 5 meters through the air. He crashed to the stone like a ragdoll, his skull cracking audibly even as blood trailed from his lips. Mountain grunted. That had been a gentle slap, but even holding back, he had nearly caved Maldred's head in. Pulling his long sword free from the stone, he began a slow, deliberate march toward Godfrey. The audience could only stare, petrified. Mercy, a word reserved only for the strongest. And today, Godfrey had claimed it for himself. Godfrey wins, the referee declared. He barely finished before Maldred was hauled away to the school nurse. Godfrey stepped down from the platform, but his path was blocked at the north door. Siegfried awaited him, towering, his eyes alight with malice. Don't fail. Meet me on that platform and know this. His glare sharpened. Once I'm done with that night of yours, I will bash your head in. Godfrey raised a single eyebrow, but said nothing. His silence was heavier than any insult. He walked past, leaving Siegfried to ascend the platform. His opponent, a sophomore, summoned a wolf. Grey dire wolf, low tier, 3.1, the referee announced. A green magic circle flared behind Siegfried, and from it emerged a 6-foot wolf, its body carved of gleaming jade, its eyes milky white with silent menace. Jade-eyed wolf, elite tier, 4.6, the referee cried. In the same instant, jade enveloped Siegfried's body. His hands swelled, twisting into monstrous wolfish paws with elongated fingers and claws that could envelop a man's head with ease. His tongue turned to gleaming jade as he licked his lips. This is going to be fun, he drawled, crouching low. Then his grin widened. But quick. He launched forward, leaping high into the air before slamming his massive paw down on the direwolf's head. The creature had no chance to dodge. It flattened under the crushing blow, blood bursting from its maw as fangs shattered. Its summoner screamed, hurling himself at Siegfried in desperation. But Siegfried's clawed hand wrapped effortlessly around his throat, lifting him like a child's toy. The boy dangled midair, his hands clawing desperately at Siegfried's jade skin, leaving no mark. Standing 191 centimeters tall, Siegfried towered over the trembling sophomore, who barely reached 172. With one arm, he strangled the boy, eyes never leaving Godfrey, who sat calmly beside Isolde. A malicious grin stretched across Siegfried's face, his gaze taunting, as if saying, "You'll be here soon." "Siegfried wins," the referee barked, urgency in his tone as if to remind Siegfried he was seconds from killing a classmate. Clicking his tongue, Siegfried tossed the boy to the ground like a discarded rag, whistling cheerfully as the student gasped and clawed at the air, his face an ugly shade of red. Beside Godfrey, Isolde spoke softly. "Will you be okay, facing him?" Godfrey's face didn't change. His eyes stayed steady, fixed on Siegfried's wolf. His jaw tightened. "I'll do just fine. I've had my eyes on that wolf for a long time." After several other fights, Isolde finally ascended the platform. Her opponent was a blue-haired girl who had already demolished her previous challengers with the overwhelming firepower of her summon. "I know you're strong, but I won't submit to a queen who is controlled by a humanoid summoner," the girl spat. "For that, I don't recognize you as Manhattan's queen." Lucy's scowl deepened as she raised her hand. A dark blue summoning diagram blossomed from her palm, spinning and widening. From its depths emerged a unicorn. Its spiraled horn was formed entirely of blue crystal, sharp and jagged with a natural curve, glinting like a weapon forged from frozen lightning. The creature's very presence exuded majesty and danger. "Gemstone unicorn, elite tier, 4.4, the referee announced. Lucy swung herself onto its back with practiced ease. A spear of gleaming blue gemstone formed in her hand, while 12 crystalline spearheads hovered above her and her unicorn like an arsenal of floating death. The unicorn reared up on its hind legs, neighing like a warhorse at the head of an army. The gemstone shards launched forward, whistling through the air. Yet Isolde merely waved her hand, and the deadly shards, each capable of piercing an armored vehicle, shattered to harmless dust before they could reach her. Snarling, Lucy hurled her gemstone spear as her summon charged across the platform like a thunderbolt. Isolde clenched her fist and struck. The spear, which carried enough force to tear down a fortress wall, shattered against her knuckles. But the shards did not fall. Instead, they whirled back into motion, cutting through the air faster than before. One shard grazed her face and struck her eye, forcing her head back. "What kind of queen are you now?" Lucy sneered, only for her expression to falter. Isolde lowered her head again. Her eye was perfectly intact. Her golden-orange eyes gleamed, glowing faintly, and in the next heartbeat, an oppressive weight descended on the platform. Lucy's body froze. Her unicorn collapsed beneath her, its proud legs buckling as it was crushed flat against the stage. Foam frothed from its mouth like a dying beast. Lucy slumped in the saddle, then fainted outright. "That's Dominion." Snow narrowed his eyes. His voice carried a rare gravity. "It's a summoner's skill, like echo or exchange. It projects the aura of a great summon directly through the summoner's eyes. In some cases, it can even kill outright depending on the summon's power and the target's will." He recited the same words a Lord Tyr told him. From the shadowed window of a building overlooking the arena, Yuan, the Asian upperclassman known as the Knight to Manhattan's King, clapped softly. "She's a monster. She might even be as strong as you," he remarked, turning to John, who stood silently at his side. "She's stronger," John said flatly. "She has 2 summons." In the secluded staff section of the arena, Teacher Edwin glanced at the combat instructor, who stood with arms crossed. "Dale has done nothing but fry his opponents. Snow has dismantled his without effort, and Isolde doesn't even need her summon. Who is this dark horse of yours? No one else here comes close." Even as the tournament carried on and other students fought, whispers of Isolde's dominance lingered in the crowd. Only when fighters like Cecil and Orwin entered did the audience briefly shift focus, yet in the end, even their efforts were measured against Isolde's display. Snow's opponents were left flailing helplessly, striking at illusions until he knocked them unconscious with casual slaps. Dale electrocuted his challengers without mercy, sending them all to the nurse's ward. Godfrey too fought twice, and now he was called again for his deciding match. This was the battle that would determine whether he advanced to the quarterfinals or lost his chance. The prize for the top 3 was immense. High-level dungeon cores, treasures that could vastly accelerate a summon's growth. As Godfrey stepped onto the platform, silence swept across the arena. His opponent was Siegfried. Gasps and whispers rose. Everyone remembered the story. On Godfrey's very first day in Manhattan, he had crossed Siegfried, and later on Siegfried had bashed his head into a wall. That beating had left Godfrey absent for a full month, said to be recuperating from both the injuries and the trauma. "You made it. Good." Siegfried's grin was cruel. His jade-eyed wolf padded beside him, its eyes glowing with white malice. "Summon that 4.0 knight of yours. Let's see whose summon is superior, your 4.0 knight or my 4.6 jade-eyed wolf." He cracked his neck, a predatory gleam sparking in his eyes. "I would have loved to be the one to bash him," Dale muttered with a relaxed smile from the stands. "But I guess no one can do the job better than Siegfried." "Siegfried's summon is built for both offense and defense," Cecil said. "With that balance, it can even challenge a 5.0 at its peak." Godfrey isn't walking out of this one. Her eyes flicked toward Isolde, who sat silently, gaze locked on the 2 figures facing each other on the platform. At Godfrey's call, Mountain materialized. The knight loomed tall. "Use blackout state." At once, Mountain's golden armor darkened, turning a sinister crimson as though drenched in fresh blood. His longsword steel shifted into obsidian, absorbing the light. The referee's eyes bulged. "Knight Captain of the Golden Order. Elite Tier, 5.0. What?" Siegfried's composure shattered. Dale's smile contorted into disbelief, while Snow's expression darkened. A jump from 4.0 to 5.0? It was absurd. If this was an innate skill, then the knight was far more than what any of them had ever realized. "Isn't that the boy we saw sitting with Isolde at the cafeteria?" Yuan asked, squinting. John only gave a faint nod. Mountain hefted his obsidian longsword and began to march forward. The jade-eyed wolf roared, slamming its forelimbs into the platform. From the stone erupted a forest of jade spikes, racing toward Mountain. But golden lightning arced across his armor, lightning infusion, and he was gone, vanishing from the danger zone. "You're dead," Siegfried howled. He descended from above, claws aimed at Mountain's helmet. Mountain did not dodge. His entire armor shimmered, transmuting into blood jade. Siegfried's claws scraped harmlessly across its surface, sparking like metal on stone. The knight's shield swung upward with brutal force, striking Siegfried squarely and launching him back several meters. Before the boy could recover, Mountain unleashed a surge of mana through his obsidian blade. "That's mana slash!" a student shouted as a beam of raw energy erupted from the sword. The jade-eyed wolf leapt aside, but the beam still carved a deep gouge into the platform, stone exploding in every direction. Snarling, Siegfried slammed his palm into the ground. For jade walls shot upward, boxing Mountain inside. His wolf struck the floor with its forelimbs, and within the prison, jagged spikes erupted upward. Jade prison! Siegfried's grin widened, manic triumph flashing in his eyes. But his expression froze as the wolf convulsed, holes splitting open across its body. It howled in agony. The jade walls collapsed, revealing Mountain crouched on his great shield. The spikes had struck him, but the damage had reflected back onto Siegfried's summon. Furious, the jade-eyed wolf turned its rage on Godfrey, sprinting at him, spat a jade spike. But in the instant before impact, Godfrey swapped positions with Mountain. The knight raised his shield, reflecting the spike's force again. He followed with a clean, merciless slash, tearing a massive gash across the wolf's crystalline hide. Meanwhile, Siegfried charged Godfrey himself, rage distorting his features. But Godfrey's calm eyes turned on him, and once again, they switched places. This time, Siegfried found himself staring directly at Mountain's charging form. A wall of steel and blood jade thundered toward him like an unstoppable tank. Blood-red spikes erupted from the ground on either side, sealing off any path of escape. Siegfried's blood ran cold. Mountain was using his summon's innate skill, better than he could himself. How is this possible? His voice cracked with panic. As if that wasn't enough, the spikes rose even higher, curving inward until they formed what looked like the ribcage of a massive beast. The crimson jade rib prison gleamed under the sun like the bones of some ancient monster. Mountain, leaving behind heavy echoes with each step, charged toward Siegfried. At that very moment, Siegfried suddenly stretched out his hand. Beside Godfrey, a black summoning diagram flared to life. From it emerged a giant dog, a 2.5 low-tier summon. The instant it appeared, Siegfried activated exchange, swapping places with the beast. In a blink, he was standing right beside Godfrey, his lips curling into a prideful grin as his jade claws arched toward Godfrey's head. At the same time, the jade-eyed wolf, which had already been on the battlefield, lunged forward, its deadly fangs snapping for Godfrey's neck. Godfrey couldn't even form a coherent thought. Everything happened in less than a heartbeat, too sudden for him to consciously react. But instinctively he called upon Echo. Mountain's armor materialized around him, and lightning crackled across his body. This lightning wasn't meant to attack. Its only purpose was to amplify his speed, though that didn't mean it wouldn't hurt when he landed a blow. With every ounce of strength he had, Godfrey forced his body forward, just enough to evade the wolf's snapping jaws. His gauntlet fist, wrapped in golden lightning, shot upward in a devastating uppercut. The punch connected squarely. Siegfried's eyes widened as blood and spit burst from his mouth. He collapsed instantly, knocked out in a single blow, his jade skin receding. Furious and more aggressive than ever, his summon roared. The jade-eyed wolf burst forth with renewed speed, only to slam headlong into the metal surface of a shield Godfrey summoned. Its claws tore through the shield with ease. This construct wasn't as durable as Mountain's true defenses. But the brief delay gave Godfrey enough time to retaliate. He thrust forward with an echo longsword, but the blade bounced harmlessly off the wolf's jade skin. Its strength was around 4.6, nearly twice Godfrey's own 2.5, and its defenses could withstand even some 5.0 tier attacks. Growling, The wolf tried to crush him under its sheer weight. Godfrey discarded the shield, rolled aside, and vanished in a flash of light. What appeared in his place was an 8-foot-tall knight clad in crimson armor, its presence oppressive and commanding. With a single swing of its massive sword, the knight carved a gash straight across the wolf's eye. Before the beast could recover, the knight slammed into it with his shield, sending it flying backwards and lying limp. Godfrey tugged his helmet off, his gaze landing on the giant dog lying on the ground. It whimpered in agony, its bones broken and body pierced by spikes that would kill it the moment Mountain willed it. Siegfried's secret, that he possessed 2 summons, would have cost Godfrey this battle. If he hadn't reacted in time, he would have been the one bleeding on the floor, his face torn open by the wolf's fangs, maybe even half dead. There had been no mercy in Siegfried's eyes. He was prepared to kill. Godfrey's face darkened. He beat Siegfried? Orwin's pupils dilated, his expression twisting with disbelief. Beside him, Cecil narrowed her eyes. The innate skill and growth rate of that knight, she murmured. It might place him in the same growth potential as the dragon species. What nonsense, Dale snapped, scowling. Siegfried was just careless. No, Cecil countered, her voice a bit sharp. His summon has the ability to copy the innate skills of other summons, and not just copy, but make them stronger. That knight isn't some mindless metal golem. It has intelligence. Her gaze locked on Mountain. Gasps and whispers erupted across the arena. A humanoid summon, especially one that intelligent, was unheard of. Godfrey was the only student in all of Manhattan Summoners High to possess one. Orwin crossed his leg and leaned back casually. So, he's entered the quarterfinals then. Cecil rose as the referee declared Godfrey the winner and announced the matches for the following day. Apparently, she and Godfrey would face each other first. Her lips curled into a sharp smile. His summon may have revealed all its cards. Can rise to 5.0, but so what? My summon is 5.8. Has mastered the ancient art of Muay Thai, and above all, she glanced at Dale and Orwin, who already knew what she meant. It has no innate skill. As Godfrey left the platform, Orwin chuckled. I almost feel bad for him. He doesn't realize his fate is already sealed. He humiliated me, Cecil, Dale said darkly. Make sure he understands why that won't happen again. With the last match concluded, the students began to leave, their conversations buzzing about what they had just witnessed. Most of the talk centered on Godfrey and his incredible knight. And make sure he stays away from Isolde, Dale added. He's dragging down her prestige. Godfrey lay on his bed, one hand behind his head, staring at the ceiling. After the match, he had gone to the cafeteria with Isolde, then returned to the dormitory as sunset neared. Cecil's summon, a 5.8 high tier, was another matter entirely. Fearsomely intelligent, it had even mastered ancient martial arts from a bygone nation destroyed during several Redgate dungeon breaks. For the first time since his return, Godfrey felt he had hit a wall. Mountain stood no chance against such a monster, especially since it lacked an innate skill. The information weighed heavily on him, filling him with a creeping sense of hopelessness. Closing his eyes, he retreated into his soul space. Before him loomed the great door, its surface almost entirely turned to wood now. Only the divider at the center, the link between the 2 massive doors, remained petrified. His eyes snapped open. He sat up abruptly, went to his desk, and flipped open his laptop. Typing Green Dungeons in Manhattan, he scrolled through the search results. Manhattan had far fewer green dungeons than places like Amazon City. Many were already claimed by guilds or cleared entirely. His heart sank with every passing line. Grinding his teeth, he kept scrolling, his expression growing darker. Then a video title caught his attention. He clicked it. On screen, a girl tearfully recorded the entrance of an abandoned subway station, its construction halted more than a decade ago. Her words were broken, but Godfrey understood. She was talking about her father and younger sister, a family of ordinary people. His eyes softened. People like them were often ignored. Closing his laptop with a snap, Godfrey rose, pulled on a black hooded jacket, jeans, and sneakers. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he boarded a taxi and left the school grounds. He had only one goal in mind: clear this dungeon. The bright beams of the taxi cut through the night, illuminating an abandoned stretch of land. At its center stood the subway entrance, dome-shaped and forlorn. The cracked cement floor around it was overrun with grass and weeds, reclaiming the forgotten place. Buildings stood to the left and right, but they were distant, nearly a kilometer away, their faint lights flickering like indifferent stars. "Are you sure it's all right for a kid to be out here this late?" the driver asked, his voice hesitant. He was a man with quite the stomach, leaning back to look at Godfrey as the boy stepped out. Godfrey turned briefly, his eyes glowing faintly for a second before returning to normal. "I'll be fine." He descended the dusty staircase leading down into the subway. Rats scuttled away at the sound of his footsteps, vanishing into cracks and holes. His brows furrowed, hard lines appearing on his forehead as his thoughts grew heavy. Had this dungeon already been cleared? The scenery remained unchanged, abandoned, dark, and eerily silent, with nothing but cobwebs for company. But then he reached the last stair, and something didn't fit. The beam of his torch caught a gathering at the far end of the station. Cheers, guttural and crude, echoed across the chamber. A group of 15 creatures stood there, humanoid in shape, clad in mismatched steel armor. Cuirasses, vambraces, greaves, and boots. The armor covered only parts of their bodies, leaving exposed their strange features, wide lupin ears jutting high above their heads like grotesque antennae. Their skin was a deep crimson. Hobgoblins, the infamous evolution of goblins. Unlike their stunted kin, usually no taller than 10-year-old children, these were as tall as grown men, tall as Godfrey himself at 183 centimeters. Each one carried a flaming torch and leather bags slung across their bodies, their cheers filled with excitement over their spoils. But the moment the bright white light of Godfrey's torch fell upon them, silence fell like a blade. Godfrey's gaze locked on the leader, a battle-hardened hobgoblin chief. A golden ring necklace hung from his neck, instantly familiar. It was the same necklace worn by the girl from the video. A heavy sadness filled Godfrey's chest. She hadn't just filmed the place. She had gone inside, and never returned. The chief, scarred and broad, with dark hair spilling freely down his back, fixed his hungry eyes on Godfrey. His mouth twisted in savage delight as he pointed his sword forward, shouting, "Jes ki Elejev." Godfrey interpreted the meaning instinctively. "Hold that meat!" The hobgoblins charged, 15 strong, shields and sabers in hand. Their boots pounded against the stone floor. Godfrey clenched his fist. In an instant, his hand became gauntlet, arcs of lightning dancing across the steel gauntlet. He remembered his boxing lessons, the hours spent on bags and drills long before he awakened as a summoner. Instinct guided him now. The first hobgoblin swung diagonally, its blade whistling through the air. Godfrey ducked low, leaning right. The saber missed by inches. He launched his right arm forward, his gauntlet fist crackling with golden lightning. It struck the hobgoblin's cheek with a thunderous impact, snapping its lower jaw and sending teeth scattering. Godfrey spun, his left fist surging with even greater power. He slammed it into the shield of the second hobgoblin. The golden lightning shredded through the wooden barrier like paper, obliterating it before tearing into the creature's chest. The cuirass caved in with a sickening crunch, ribs snapping as the hobgoblin was hurled backward, vomiting blood. 2 more pressed in. Godfrey raised his forearms, gauntlets sparking as they deflected twin saber strikes. His blue eyes darkened as they lifted, locking onto the chief hobgoblin. The brute only chuckled, arrogantly inspecting his blade, waiting for his warriors to deliver the kill. Suddenly, Godfrey retreated, his movements sharp and precise, weaving through their attacks with inhuman precision. The chief's expression faltered. His voice thundered through the station, "Rakish Jel Kakaba!" Before the warriors could overwhelm him, a golden summoning diagram erupted behind the chief. From its brilliance stepped forth a towering figure, Mountain. The hobgoblin chief spun around in shock, but it was already too late. A wrathful slap sent its head flying, severed clean from its shoulders. The head smashed into the station wall with a crack, scattering dust and debris as the body collapsed in a pool of blood. Empowering himself with lightning infusion, Mountain burst forward, his long sword blazing with golden arcs. He swung it in a wide arc, releasing an energy wave that carved through 3 hobgoblins in one strike. With a grunt, Godfrey summoned his long sword mid-motion, intercepting another strike. Steel clashed, sparks flying, before his blade sheared clean through the hobgoblin's sword and buried halfway into its neck. Gurgling, it collapsed as he shoved it aside. When he looked up, the battle was already finished. Hobgoblins littered the floor, their vile green blood soaking into the cracked cement. At the center of it all stood Mountain, golden armor gleaming, surrounded by carnage. Godfrey exhaled. You know, for the first time, I feel like going back is the way forward. He turned toward the staircase with narrowed eyes. It was no longer made of cement. Instead, a crude, uneven staircase carved into raw stones spiraled upward. He climbed quickly, Mountain following with heavy, metallic steps. At the top, they were met with an alien sky, a vast purple moon glowing high above, the heavens littered with red stars that bled against the dark. They stood in a canyon. Jagged rock walls rose on both sides, the terrain dry and desolate. Godfrey's armored feet rang with sharp echoes on the stone path, while Mountain's heavier strides reverberated like hammer against an anvil. Together, small and large in matching armor, they walked onward. What a strange sky, right, Mountain? Godfrey rested his sword on his pauldron, glancing up at the endless purple expanse. Mountain gave only a grunt in reply, but suddenly stopped. His head snapped to the cliffs above. Godfrey followed his gaze. Both ridges of the canyon were crawling with red-skinned figures. Hobgoblins, dozens of them, bristling with weapons. They had walked into a military camp. Stones rained down first, hurled by dozens of strong arms. Spears followed, then arrows whistling from above. Mountain raised his shield, covering Godfrey as rocks shattered against it. Spears splintered, and arrows bounced harmlessly off the reinforced steel. "Kashu Evexes!" a voice bellowed. It came from a towering figure, a blue-skinned orc nearly 7 feet tall, tusks jutting downward like curved ivory blades. His tribal markings glowed faintly under the starlight, his spiky dark red hair standing wild. His body was strangely monstrous, 3 thick fingers on each hand, and only 2 massive toes planted firmly on the stone on each foot. It also had a dungeon core chained to its chest. His bulging eyes trembled with confusion as he watched his warriors fall. Some collapsed with their chests caved in, as though struck by invisible stones from above. Others dropped with holes clean through their bodies, pierced by unseen spears and arrows. The canyon echoed with the sickening cracks of bones and skulls shattering. Picking up a huge bone club, the blue-skinned goblin general leaped from the top of the canyon, slamming heavily on Mountain's shield, causing the knight captain to fall on its knees, the rocky earth caving inward due to the power of the impact. "Lu Rokashi na!" The goblin general pointed the club at Mountain with a furious scowl before dividing into 2, and then the 2 split once more. For goblin generals, all of them powerful enough to be a high-tier 5.2, surrounded Godfrey. Out of the lips of the 4 of them came out jeers. Seeing this, Mountain took a heavy step forward, his armor gaining a crimson shade, crackling with black lightning as his cloak became as dark as night. Godfrey placed his palm on his face as soft laughter left his lips. "I almost thought I was dead. Thank you for this skill." His blue eyes flared with a bright gleam reflecting the purple moon.